The village is surrounded by mountains with fields nearby. It's called Trem, where people greet each other. Cows graze in the fields. A woman washes clothes by the river, and a rooster walks in the foreground. A young man digs the ground with a hoe, sending clumps flying everywhere. Another man pushes a wheelbarrow full of stones, while a third tries to lever up a stump, and in the background, someone hauls a log. The boy's name is Luca. He's 10 years old, and he says the same thing happens to him every day as he keeps working with his hoe. But if they had a tractor, the boy would be working with it, and everything would be much easier. This boy is someone reborn from another world. Although he was born again, his memories of his past life are vague. He only recalls living in comfort before. And in this new world, he says, there are no mechanisms at all. A young man looks at his finger and slowly starts spinning it. In this world, magic exists, and he twists a stream of water around his finger. He says this world feels like one of the games he played before being reborn. At that moment, a dragon and wizards appear in the background, and he forms a small water orb, spins it, swallows it, then sighs heavily. With magical power, you can create elements like fire and water here. In this world, almost everyone can use simple everyday magic, including fire, water, earth, and wind. There is a bright light surrounding the young man, like a protective barrier, and he says we need to keep working with the same spirit. In this world, there's also supportive magic, like one that strengthens the body, and the main character keeps training hard while others work alongside him, including a man pushing a cart loaded with goods. The sun sets behind the mountains as the main character shares that he was born in a village full of challenges, where his grandmother herds pigs into the yard, and his wife hangs laundry on the line. But this is a very beautiful and peaceful land. The boy looks out over the vast plowed fields and the village nestled at the foot of the mountains. The father calls Luke to come home and walks toward him. Luke stops, rests his hoe on his shoulder, and looks at his father. The man says Luke is doing great. The main character asks about his father's work. He replies he feels great and can't afford to take a break, and they plan to prepare a magical bath at home. They return from the community fields, and a man in the field waves goodbye. The father and son smile at each other and slowly walk home. In the village, everyone smiles at them, waves, and offers food as they carry a basket and head straight home. A father and son are coming home, greeted by a little girl running happily toward them, calling out to her dad and brother. While a woman warmly welcomes Edward and Luke, the man joyfully says they're home, and Luke echoes that he's home too. Alice asks her brother if they'll bathe together today, and Lucas says he'll heat the water. Their mom checks if he's tired, but he replies he wants to prepare the bath himself so as not to bother their parents. Mom says it turns out we all bathe in the tub Luca made. Dad says he used to think such baths were a luxury, but has gotten used to it, then invites their daughter to join them, but she declines, and the wife notes that he's not very good at washing others. The amount of water depends on the magical power, and the temperature is set by imagination. In this village, people don't usually bathe in tubs. They just wipe themselves with a damp towel. Luca is already filling the tub, and his sister is hurrying after him. But Luke remembers how he used to bathe in his past life, so he immediately disliked the way the villagers washed themselves. The main character couldn't resist, and used earth magic to turn the storage room into a bathroom, leaving his parents shocked and completely confused about what their son had done. The boy was very nervous and doesn't remember exactly what he did, but his parents liked it, especially Alice, who was thrilled. In the end, everything turned out well, and Alice asked her brother to do it the usual way, which he agreed to, starting to work with the water. Using magic, he gathers water and splits it into tiny droplets. Luca creates a little man from the water and begins to tell how long ago Sekitaro was born under the branches of the great tree, while Luca and his sister watch in awe. Alice watches with fascination not only the water strider, but also the other water creatures around her. Drawing on stories from his past life, the main character puts together a special water puppet show just for his sister. Luca came up with these little tricks to cheer up his little sister, but it's not as easy as it seems at first. To do this, Luca needs to focus and control his magical power, and it really helps that he has been training since childhood and always knew he was in a new world. In his childhood, his mind was clear because he was born anew into a new world, yet he has no memory of what happened before this rebirth. Luca can't remember anything. His mind feels like it's filled with constant noise, but he knows one thing for sure. Something bad has happened. Now Luke has loving parents who care for him and raise him with the help of magic. Sonia dries him after his bath, while Edward uses wind magic to help him dry faster. From the very first taste of his, Luke tried everything to find out if he could use magic as a baby. And he noticed that repeating the same action made his magical power grow, and that's when he first felt tired from using magic. At that moment, Luca felt as if he understood and sensed the whole world around him, and it seemed to him that he was flying in the sky. Luca looks at his parents with wide-open eyes, while Sonia and Edward cry tears of joy, realizing that back then, the boy was close to death. The priest arrived just in time, and thanks to his help, the child recovered. Luca would remember the joyful and relieved faces of his parents for a long time after that day. The magic the hero releases comes from his own power, and thanks to that, he at least figured out how it all works. Additionally, magical power can be drawn from the environment, and Luca has already learned how to do this, harnessing magic from water, earth, and air, then transforming it into even stronger energy. Since the main character was reborn in a world with magic, he decided to learn how to use it to make his life easier, while his sister watches in awe as he creates and controls water figures. At the same time, Luke delights his beloved sister, treating each day as a special chance to practice magic, until their mother suddenly bursts in, startling them both and saying it's time to wrap up. Mom sets the ready food on the table while Luca magically mixes drinks. The table is filled with delicious dishes, the whole family gathers to enjoy the meal, and Dad shares an interesting story with Luca during dinner. Luke's father tells him that his magical power is very important for life, and that using it just for a bath is a luxury. Luke realizes he must be careful with the Force, and when his father asks if he's okay, Luke replies that he is fine. Luca asks his father if something is wrong, but his dad just smiles warmly and says everything is fine. The head of the family says his wife cooks wonderfully, and Alice replies that her mom cooks better than her dad. It's nighttime, and Luca is lying on his bed in his room, which has a wardrobe, a nightstand, and slippers by the bed. He doesn't expect anything extraordinary from his new life. His sister is already sound asleep, hugging her favorite stuffed bunny, while their father sits next to their mother holding a mug with a bottle nearby. Luca dreams of a future where his family lives peacefully and happily. The sun has risen over the mountains and the rooster has crowed. Alice wakes up, slowly walks to her parents, greets everyone with a good morning, and wonders where her brother might be. Mom also greets her daughter with a good morning and says that Luca is already out in the field. Alice is surprised by this, and Dad adds that Luca is practicing his magical abilities there. So Edward decides to go see what his son is up to, while his wife and daughter wish him luck. In the field, Luca practices controlling earth magic, reaching out his hands to mimic the trick he did with water dolls, lifting the soil and trying to shape it like a doll. The main character is crafting a doll made of several parts that come together as one, and with a touch of magic, she sets it into a battle stance. Now the doll is ready for action. The father asks in surprise if his son played with earth magic today, but Luca replies he didn't play, and that the doll's name is Bon, which he made to look like a classic skeleton from 3D games, then tells it to get to work. Lialka is swinging the hoe, and Luca tells his father that this will make the work in the field go faster. His father stands surprised, thinking his son already knows how to control such powerful magic. The doll suddenly falls apart into pieces, leaving Luke and his father stunned. His father says Luke still needs to work on his balance, but Luke is confident he'll get it, and his father warns him not to be surprised if all the villagers start staring at him. The main thing in the hero's life is playing with magic in a remote village. Luca makes his skeleton puppet rise from the ground again, while his father walks toward the people who waved and called him. The village of Trame is a small mountain community of about 200 people, located far from big cities, where local men work in the fields. This village was built by order of the Margrave who rules this land. The main reason for settling here is a special magical herb that grows only in certain soil and is used to make powerful potions. In front of us is a field with local houses visible behind. Luca made a doll holding a hoe, thinking how to make fieldwork easier for everyone, so he shaped this doll from the earth to help people work. Luca tells me this clay doll is named Bon, and when the main character controls her, it makes working in the field much easier. Bon hoes the rows while a chicken watches nearby. Luca asks Linnale's opinion, and she excitedly exclaims that he did an amazing job. Linnale, Luca's childhood friend and the village elder's granddaughter, is almost like a sister to him. The girl also knows about the bathroom and uses it often. Linnale says it reminds her of how Luca plays with Elisa, but Luca replies it's not play, it's special training. Then the doll falls apart, and Luca explains that things are much more complicated with her. An old friend says she wouldn't mind checking out Luke's water toys, and he's excited by the idea, suggesting they take a bath together next time, which makes her blush as she imagines them sitting together in the bathroom. A girl runs away shyly, raising both hands to her face and calling out her friend's name, while Luca, rubbing his cheek in surprise, notices that his girlfriend is acting very strangely in this situation. Luca and his father enter the house together, and the father cheerfully announces to the family that they're back. A woman greets her son and husband, while a little girl happily calls her brother to the bathroom right away. Dad asked Alice if she would go with him today, but she said she didn't want to, He got angry because he thinks it's unfair that she always goes only with Luke. The son asked if Dad even hears himself, and Alice is already crying and shouting in the bathroom. Luca doesn't understand why Alice screams since the doll is right here, but she waves her hands saying she wants a doll she can squeeze, and that isn't cute at all now. Hearing this, Luca finally gets it and apologizes. A guy is sculpting a figure he made before for Alice, and she says this one is much better. Luca realizes that thanks to his practice, his dolls now look more like real people than before. The main character also creates a figure with way more muscles than the one he made for Alice, and he wonders if these new dolls are really ugly after all. Luca believes the ball's structure definitely needs to change, but adding more parts would make it harder to control, so it's better to find a way to manage all the parts together, rather than individually. There should be a way to make such a doll, and Luca managed to find it. He turned the doll into a single mechanism, making it look like a little person. And when Alice asked her brother what was wrong, he told her not to worry about him. Suddenly, controlling multiple parts at once became much easier. Luke's puppet started moving quickly, and with just a bit of focus, everything worked smoothly. Likely thanks to his persistent practice. Alice puffs her cheeks and says her doll is way cuter, as Luke's muscular doll and Alice's doll stand facing each other. Magic is still a mystery to Luke, and he wants to ask the priest about it. Meanwhile, their mom asks the kids to get out of the bath again, and they obey. A father asks his son how he's feeling, explaining that using both water and earth magic in one day is a lot, and that magical power isn't unlimited. It's almost impossible for ordinary people to control the earth and a puppet at the same time. The mom has just found out her son plays with dolls, and Luca explains he's not just playing. He wants to help people and make life easier, not only for himself, but for others too. The mom says it's a good idea, but they're all very worried about him. Luca thanks them for their care and says he's fine now, and he definitely won't die like he almost did when he was a baby. The family is shocked. Elise starts crying, saying she doesn't want to lose her brother. The mother explains that Luca was just joking. The father calls out loudly to his son, and only then does Luca realize what he just said. An unfortunate situation unfolds. The mother looks at her son with pain in her eyes while comforting her crying daughter in her arms, and the father glares at the son angrily, but is deeply worried about him. A father tells his son that even joking about death is not allowed. Luca apologizes, and his dad pats his head, saying it's time for him and his sister to go to bed. Alice lies crying with her brother, saying she only wants to fall asleep with him. Luca apologizes and promises everything will be fine. While the family head notes she's worrying too much, the mother is also concerned for the child, and the parents say Luca is very special to them. Luca and his dad are already packed and waving towards the fields. Dad has a hoe on his shoulder. Luca carries a small bundle, probably food, and Sonia and Elisa walk alongside Luca and Edward. Many people are already working in the field, waving to Lucas and his father to greet them. The father tells his son they need to work hard today, and the son wishes his dad good luck, while the main character plans to try making a doll just like the water spirit. Luke makes a big copy of the doll he made in the bathroom, but this one is bigger and made from a different material. The doll swings a hoe energetically, hitting the ground so hard that clumps of dirt fly everywhere. This doll quickly and energetically hits the floor. Luca thinks it's powerful and effective, but if Alice saw it, she'd definitely cry, as Luca controls the doll with one hand since he made it himself. Luke looks toward the forest fenced off nearby. Towering trees block most of the view, but he still senses something approaching the village, while the doll keeps working steadily. The main character decides to use wind magic to create a loud noise. The men look around, realizing it's an alarm, and the father rushes to Luca, who immediately asks him to look toward the forest. In a world where magic exists, monsters roam. One man shouts that these are magical forest wolves. There are 5 of them now, but more could soon appear, and the wolves are hostile, preparing to attack. The man is shocked they made it out in broad daylight. He warns everyone about the monsters and urges Luke to run to the priest to get the villagers evacuated immediately, while Luke, worried about his father, chooses to stay and fight alongside them. Luke's father shouts to the archers to keep the monsters from getting past the fence and orders them to throw stones at them using earth magic. All the men listen and agree with Edward. Lucas says he should help them fight the monsters too, but his father still sends him to the village. Lucas tries to argue but doesn't get the chance. The boy's father says that children must always listen to adults, and the main character looks at his dad with surprise. A man gently smiles at his son and says that as a father, his duty is to protect his family at all costs. So now he trusts Luca to take care of Alice and their mom. The man says some forest wolves don't scare him and laughs contentedly, while Luca just smiles in response. But before leaving, he decides to help them, leaving his father surprised and asking what his son is doing. The archers had already grabbed their bows and were rushing into battle when one man ran up to Captain Ed to say they were short on arrows. But Luke's father assured him everything was ready and the arrows were prepared. Just as Luke ran off toward the village to find the priest, Roger sees a huge pile of arrows in front of him. Now there are definitely enough for all the archers to make sure no monster survives, and even Roger is surprised by how many there are. Roger claims there are at least 1,000 arrows here. Captain Ed admits he's sometimes amazed by his son's strength. And when Roger finds out it was Luca who did it, he's even more surprised. Edward asks Roger to hand out the arrows to everyone and stop calling him Captain. Roger understands what Luke's father wants and now addresses him by his first name. Luke rushes into the church, where a beautiful tree mosaic and a huge bell catch the eye. He shouts that there's trouble. Mages have broken in, and the priest asks him to repeat what he said about the mages. The main character says his father and others have decided to fight, and the grandparents sitting nearby are shocked and scared but say they can help too, suggesting they should inform the village elder. Dad says everything is fine and there's no need to panic. Luca explains that his father ordered the evacuation of the residents, but the priest replies he wants to see everything for himself first, and they leave the church. The priest uses magic to see what's happening on the battlefield, saying Edward and his men are lucky right now. Luca is amazed at how far he can see, and the priest explains it's a type of magic that enhances the body. Edward stands with his sword while everyone else has already drawn their bowstrings. They're fully ready for battle. The monsters aren't far behind, bearing sharp fangs and about to launch their attack. Luke's father stands at the front, aiming his sword at the wolves, while the archers release their fully drawn bows, sending arrows and stones flying straight at the forest wolves. Arrows and stones hit their targets precisely, defeating the wolves. The people cheer, some raising bows, others swords, celebrating their victory over the Maxbarians, while the Holy Father says that the large number of arrows helped repel the monster attack. Luca is glad his arrows came in handy during the battle with the monsters. The Holy Father asks if Luca made all the arrows himself, and Luca admits he didn't know how many were needed, so he made plenty, leaving the Holy Father thoughtful about Luca's actions. The Holy Father says what Luke did was incredible, and asks him to come in for an important talk. Luke agrees and says he'll come. The monsters have been defeated, and the grandfather who was in the church explains he just wanted to help. Luca notices his dad and his friend coming up behind him, smiling. Luca says they did a great job, and his dad laughs, saying it was really easy. Roger says the arrows Luca made really helped them a lot. The men also greet Linnell's father, and the Holy Father asks if anyone needs help, but the men joke that this battle was easier than working in the fields. The men in the field have already started taking apart the bodies, collecting skins and tusks, and since the meat is edible, there will be enough for everyone. Luke's father and Roger went to see the Holy Father to inform him and invite him to join them in the field, and he agreed. Luke asks what he should do now, and his father tells him the work is done for today, so he can go home, rest, and tell his mom everything. Luke waves goodbye to the men and they wave back. The men sit in a half circle as Roger says that such creatures didn't used to appear in the forest, but now monsters show up even in broad daylight. Elder Tostin explains that a magical force draws these beasts, and the Holy Father adds that they sense this power instinctively. Roger asks if they are really looking for some kind of magical herb, and the Holy Father replies that if they were herbivorous monsters, it would make sense, but since they are predators, they must be after something else. The Holy Father says Luke might have attracted them, noting the boy has a lot of magical power, and it's important to recognize how strong and pure this magic is, which together makes the onion especially tasty food for wild beasts. Luke's father angrily shouts that he's hungry and lunges forward, grabbing the priest by the collar, shocking everyone standing behind him. Roger loudly calls out his rank while the squad leader addresses Edward as young man, asking him to be quiet and calm down. The Holy Father apologizes, saying he chose his words poorly, while Father Luca grits his teeth, barely holding back his anger. The man comes down and apologizes, saying he couldn't hold back, looking at Edward with concern. Roger and the elder approach him, but he asks them not to call him that anymore, saying everything here is different from how it was in his father's land. Back home, Luca tells his mother what happened in the field. His mother and sister listen with surprise, while his father sits quietly, realizing that his main priority now is to protect his family and the entire village. Lucas says he's home. His mom greets him with a broom in hand, about to ask something but doesn't get the chance, as he explains that the monster bodies haven't been fully cleared yet, so they were sent home earlier than usual. The son asks his mom where Alice is, and she replies that their daughter is sleeping. Then she mentions that Lenil came over, helped around the house, and played with Alice. And when Luca asks where Lenil is now, Mom explains that she's in the bathroom, taking a shower. The main character opens the bathroom door with a soft creak and sees Lin-El. She hesitates, and he says he remembers her wanting to see the water dolls, promising to show her everything, filling the house with her surprise scream. Mom says you can't enter the women's restroom without permission. Luke says he understands, and will definitely knock next time. The girl says it's okay and she just didn't expect it. Mom apologizes for her rude son, and the girl says she understands. Lenny thanks Luca for yesterday because her dad told her how he helped defeat the monsters, but Luca says he didn't do anything. It was all over by the time he got to the church. As soon as the conversation turned to the church, the main character suddenly remembered that the priest had asked him to stop by. Luke walks into the church on a beautiful day outside, and inside he is immediately greeted warmly by the Holy Father, with a smiling young woman standing beside him who also welcomes Luke. The young man greets the Holy Father and the sister, and the Holy Father thanks Luca for the pair she promised. The main character admits he forgot his promise and did something bad to Linnea, surprising the church sister standing next to the Holy Father. Luca suddenly starts feeling strange and admits he's always been a bit forgetful. He says something's definitely wrong and needs to be fixed, but he doesn't understand what's happening to him, while his father and sister watch him with concern as Luca screams through clenched teeth. The Holy Father approaches Luca, sits beside him, takes his hand, and gently places his other hand on his shoulder, reassuring him that everything is all right. Luca begins to feel warmth and slowly calms down. Luke feels a calmness within him thanks to the magical power of the Holy Father. He thinks about his dad and admits it felt a bit strange, but his father explains that kids are especially sensitive to such things, and the key is to stay calm, after which Luke shifts his attention to his sister. Ulrich's sister looks both deeply upset and shocked, tears streaming down her cheeks, clearly caught completely off guard by what happened. The Holy Father calls Sister Ulrika, who apologizes and quickly leaves, saying she needs to rest for a while. The main character asks his father what happened to his sister, and the father explains that she is very sensitive, unlike a child, and that over time she became more emotional and often cried. Luke decided to ask the Holy Father why he had called him, and the father explained it was because of his unique magical abilities, though the boy didn't quite understand what he meant. The Holy Father says a powerful magical force is coming from his body, attracting the attention of evil beings beyond the barrier, and it seems Luke is starting to understand where the priest is leading him. Lucas says it turns out yesterday's monsters appeared because of his magical power, while the Holy Father admits he can't say that with absolute certainty. The priest says there's nothing wrong with it. He just decided to teach Lucas how to contain his magical power, and Lucas quickly learned how to keep the magic within himself. Luca thanks his father, who says he never uses his magical powers unless absolutely necessary, applying magic only when truly needed, and that self-learning has its limits, as Luca has undergone special training since childhood. The Holy Father radiates his power, and Luke stands before him, frozen, unable to look away from what's happening right before his eyes. Luke realizes he's still far from the magical power of the Holy Father. He says the father has hidden such incredible magic, but the father replies that he's actually not as strong as the main hero. The father understands that Luca has seen his magical power, which means Luca's feelings are intact, and now the Holy Father wants to teach him how to hide his magic, and Luca thanks him for it. The Holy Father says that every living being has magical power within them, which is used to cast various spells. He crosses his arms and a thread of fire appears around him. Father says that to avoid using up all its magical power, the bow can absorb and blend magic from the world around it. Luca thought about this absorption and mixing, and it seemed to him that everything he was taught since childhood was wrong. Luke is still a kid and doesn't know the names of the New World's techniques, so he decided to make up his own. Chakra is where magical energy gathers. Cycle is when magic flows in from outside. And magic wave is when magic itself is used. It turned out that the titles here had slightly different meanings. Chakra meant compression. Circulation was the absorption of magical energy, and magical vibrations actually referred to mixing, which confused Luke so much he grabbed his head. The father says this technique is very simple. You cover the bow with almost all your magical power, then hide it under a thin, invisible layer made from a small part of that magic, so no one can detect the hidden power. This is the way to mask it. The priest notices that Lucas looks pale and asks if he's okay, to which Lucas replies that he's fine and has come to understand what it means to hide the truth. The father tells Lucas, if you understand what hiding means, try doing it here now. Lucas hesitates a bit, but agrees. Luke gathers his power around him, now looking just like the Holy Father when he concealed his presence. The man watches the hero Ly closely, his expression showing satisfaction with how Luke is hiding himself. The Holy Father raised a finger to his chin and said Luke's skill at hiding was simply remarkable. Luca thanked his father and promised to keep training, then said goodbye and ran home, while his father reminded him to take care of himself. The Holy Father is surprised by what happened to Luke, as he seemed deeply troubled. The priest approaches the wooden door with iron fittings and opens it. The door gives way easily but creaks loudly. Opening the door for the man, you see a large tree with a thick trunk surrounded by flowers, bathed in sunlight. When asked if Luca has already gone home, he replies yes, and then heads back to Vulcan. A man explains that the girl is a priestess and asks why she cried. She replies that Luca was hurt and she felt very sad, adding that the child is innocent, while the Holy Father watches everything closely. The priestess says that even this sacred tree won't protect him and places her hand on its trunk, while the father also looks up at the tree's crown. Velkin says this is a huge sacred tree that protects the land around it and takes root right here. The girl says the tree was meant to protect him and hide all his magical powers, and the Holy Father adds that the barrier alone wasn't enough to fully conceal Luke's magic. My father wonders if it's because Luca has a large amount of magical power, but the priestess explains it's not about quantity or even quality, but the extraordinary purity of that power. The priestess says that although the bow was hidden behind a barrier, its light still couldn't be concealed, and the monsters found it. The father assures her it's not her fault, and she tries to calm herself, thanking him for teaching her how to hide so she can stay safer. The woman took off her headpiece, revealing elf-like ears, and said she would protect the tree alongside the Holy Father, and thanks to their efforts, the village lives in peace. Velkin says she's a half-elf and still has a lot to learn because she's very young, and the Holy Father jokes that if she thinks she's young, then he's just a baby compared to her. A girl with elf ears asks if the priest really meant to call her old. She smiles sweetly, and the priest, surprised by the question from the priestess, quickly explains that he didn't mean it that way at all. The priestess says everything is fine, and the elves take pride in their age, comparing their people to trees that grow slowly, but that's actually a good thing. Sister Wilkin explains that although they look very young, people see them as old, but among elves they are still very young, like seedlings. The girl says that the ancestors of elves are the high elves, who look even younger and hardly age over time. The priestess says that if the Holy Father ever meets the high elves, he must never laugh at their appearance, or he could be killed on the spot. Holy Father, I will gladly keep that in mind. The girl says thanks shouldn't go to her alone. The Holy Father doesn't understand, so she explains that they must also remember the man who found the sacred tree here and ask the elves to send a priestess to this land. The priestess smiles and says that without this man the village wouldn't exist at all. The Holy Father agrees, expressing his gratitude to everyone, thanking the sacred tree, the priestess, and of course, the Margrave. Luca lies in a big meadow, thinking that in the world of magic every spell already has its name. Feeling embarrassed and ashamed for acting foolishly, he rolls on the ground holding his head. Luca sits down and immediately starts squeezing, absorbing, and mixing, shouting that this is exactly how it should be. A bright, powerful light appears, and at the end, to keep the monsters from noticing, the hero activates camouflage. After all the spells the hero cast, a round object appeared. Luca looked at it in surprise, not understanding what it was, and when all the magic hit him at once, a strange round stone formed nearby. The main character sighs with relief, glad to have finally spoken his mind, feeling a bit lighter, then says it's late and time to go home, leaving the stone he made on the ground. Luke's mom meets him and says he's late today. Luke explains he went to church and learned a lot about magic, and when his dad asks him to show what he learned, Luke says he's tired, which his dad notices, and his mom adds that Alice was waiting for Luke to take a bath. The boy says he's very tired today, so Alice will get to play with the dolls more than usual. The girl sighs sadly while their parents smile, watching their friendly children. The wife asks what happened to their son, and the husband replies that it's a spell called concealment, explaining that this way their dear son is safely protected. Dawn breaks with a rooster crowing nearby, and bright sunlight flooding everything around. The wife smiles as she slices an apple while the husband gazes ahead thoughtfully, pursing his lips and rubbing his chin, one leg resting on a chair. Luke says that yesterday the Holy Father was actively teaching him how to hide, but he's not sure how well he's doing. As he explains, he slightly opens his mouth and reaches one hand forward. My father says that if someone steps more than 20 paces away from him, no one of his level would even notice that person. Luke asks about these 20 paces, surprised if it's really that significant, and the man replies that yes, it's truly impressive. Even he himself wouldn't be able to notice. The main character says he wants to try a different way to hide his magical power, and his father looks at him in surprise, not understanding how else magic could be hidden. Lucas says he discovered something new about himself when he was feeling disappointed, and before shielding himself with magical power, he needs to make room for it. He blushes slightly, excited and waiting. The main character created a space and transferred all its magical power into his body. Then he formed a shell around the space that no longer holds any magic, and a bright shell appears around the bow. The hiding technique the Pope taught Luke lets you conceal magical power under just one layer, but Luke's method is to create 2 layers at once, and all he can think about is whether he'll succeed. The father and mother stare at their son in shock, mouths wide open. The father even falls off his chair, losing a slipper, while the mother freezes with her hand raised to her mouth, dropping a sliced apple, as Luca asks if they're impressed by how well he can hide. The father says his son isn't here. The mother asks if her son is okay, and Luca replies that he's fine and safe, waving his hands when suddenly all 3, mother, father, and Luca, are startled by a loud scream echoing through the house. Alice is crying and runs to her brother, Luca, who doesn't understand what happened and reaches out to his little sister. The girl says she doesn't want her brother to disappear, and Luca reassures her that everything is fine, he's right there and won't go anywhere. The father says his son hid so well he thought he'd disappeared, and the mother asks him not to use such a strong hiding ability unless necessary. To which Luca replies he won't disguise himself like that without a good reason. Luca learns that Alice can sense his magical power from afar, and when their father asks if she knows where her brother is, she replies that she always does. Alice goes downstairs and shows where she senses Luca when he's not home, saying he's always there when he wakes up, while the surprised faces of the other family members reveal that the spot is obvious. A father is amazed that his daughter can sense her brother even from so far away. In the background, hills stretch out with a lone house perched atop a mountain, a path leading up to it, surrounded by fields and mountains. Edward is amazed that Alice can feel her brother's magical power so strongly, even when he's working in the field, and Lucas says that's a great thing for his sister. The father starts laughing and says she's his daughter from Sonia. The mother laughs along and agrees, while Lucas says he'll hide his magical power so the very evil beasts won't find him, and his sister asks again about hiding it. Luke starts to hide, but this way is easier than before, especially for Alice. When he feels no strength at all, Alice says it's okay because this helps her feel her brother better. Luke asks if he's really that bad at hiding, which surprises his father, who tells him he's a great kid, while his mother, covering her mouth in surprise, adds that Alice just has a strong sense of his magical power. Alice smiles happily, blushes a little, and says it's because she loves him very much. Luca replies that he understands, thanks Alice, and gently strokes her head. The father believes he can be proud of his children because they are growing up smart, and you can see the happiness in his eyes. He's also sure that his own father would be proud of his grandchildren too. From the house where they live, someone calls everyone to breakfast, and after a tasty meal, the father and son head out to work in the field. Luke's father is transported back in time, where the men standing behind a barrel with snacks and a bottle ask if he's really carrying flowers for his beloved, and the boy with the bouquet smiles and explains that they were actually forbidden from drinking in the city center. They say they can't meet Margareba's son in the city, then start laughing and joking that they don't need him anyway, since they already know he's just a concubine's child, an ordinary person like them. The men shout that he always says that, but he's educated. They tell him to marry his girlfriend soon, saying otherwise the special occasion drinks will go to waste, and he just waves them off, thinking it's really time to get married. The young man recalls the past, hearing mocking whispers from dark silhouettes calling him just a concubine's son, and sneering that his mother died giving birth to him. His father told him not to worry about what people say behind his back, because he's his son, and Ed replied that he understood and wouldn't pay any attention to it. Edward is a little boy wrapped in a blanket, lying alone in bed, struggling to understand why his mother died and left him all by himself. The young man keeps walking with a bouquet in his hands, completely unaware of everything and everyone around him, lost in thoughts about starting his own family. The boy suddenly snaps back to reality on the street, hearing a familiar voice calling out for someone to stop. A man holds a woman tightly, calls her by name, and reassures her that everything is okay. She asks him to let go, and he says he will love and cherish her. But she replies that she doesn't want that because she already loves someone else. Ed flies up and punches the guy right in the face, sending him flying backward. Sonia, in tears, runs away and calls Edward, who is furious but knows he must protect his girlfriend. Edward takes a defensive stance as 3 guards point their swords at him. Sonia shouts his name, while the guy who got hit protests, asking how Edward dared touch him and who he thinks he is. Edward looks at the man with displeasure, while Sonia asks him to stop, reminding him he doesn't know who this person is. In the center stands a large, beautiful building resembling a church, with a tree visible inside. A strong-built man, apparently the father of the boy who was beaten, says that even if the young man is the Margrave's son, he asks for him to be punished severely. His own son sits nearby with a bandaged cheek and one leg crossed over the other. Edward believes this man will be the next head of the Viscount family. Sitting beside his father with hands clasped and head bowed, Edward listens as his father asks for understanding, saying his son deeply regrets what he has done. The father says his son will be discharged from the army and sent to settle the forbidden borderlands, with all the income from there going toward compensation payments, while Edward quietly sits beside him. Additionally, Edward is not allowed to leave the area until compensation is paid, and as the conversation continues, it becomes clear that the forbidden lands are a dangerous place inhabited only by elves and dragons, which the affected person actually finds quite appealing. An old bearded man, likely the church priest, says that by God's law, compensation must be paid, and Edward will be bound by a magical contract preventing him from leaving the forbidden lands until he repays his debt. Edward's father sits across from his son's family, watching Edward stand before the priest, who asks if he agrees, and Edward places his hand on his chest, affirming that he does. But the boy who was hit clenches his fist and says this isn't enough to make up for what was done to him. His father stands behind, stunned and unable to believe his eyes, reaching out as if to stop his son but ultimately holding back. The young man insists that compensation must be paid with goods from forbidden lands, and that tax evasion should be punishable by death. The father calls his son a fool and the priest appeals to the Margrave, who agrees. Markgraf was clearly annoyed and said that if the Viscount truly thought it necessary. The man looked surprised and tried to speak, but his son stopped him, declaring that the matter was settled. Everyone stood on opposite sides of Edward as the Holy Father began to speak, declaring that a special curse in the name of the God of the Covenant would now be placed upon him. A beam of light then shone down on the boy, illuminating the entire room and the large house with a balcony. In this very house, Edward's father sits and admits his son has caused quite a stir. Then he raises a finger, asks Tosden to bring some alcohol, and Tosden, already holding a tray with a bottle, hands it to him. Edward sits across from his father, looking remorseful and sincerely sorry for everything that happened today, asking for his forgiveness. My father laughed but praised his son for trying to protect the woman he clearly loves. Edward says it's pointless to try conquering forbidden lands where elves and dragons live. He asks if his father has heard the stories about elves, to which his father replies that if you anger a half-elf, nothing much happens, but if you anger a true elf, the whole country could vanish. The father adds that angering the high elf could lead to a real disaster, and Edward, clearly worried, explains that elves are actually very dangerous to humans. Edward's father turns around holding a glass of alcohol and asks Ulrika if it's true, to which she replies that it mostly is, while Edward sits stunned, staring at them with wide eyes. The girl says she's glad to meet Edward, and that she's a half-elf named Ulrika, adding that she's not as vengeful as full elves, so the young man doesn't need to worry about that. Edward turns to the girl and says it's a great honor to meet a half-elf lady. Edward's father adds that he was the one who invited her, taking a sip from his glass, while the butler stands quietly behind them, watching Edward and the girl. The man also says that a sacred tree was found on his new land, and Edward is surprised, wondering if this branch of the World Tree might be protecting the entire world. The half-elf says that Lord Christoffel requested a priestess who can connect with the sacred tree, and Edward's father adds that Dorika has arrived to become that priestess, and with her powers, they can easily cover all the compensations. My father says there's a lot of healing herbs growing there, and selling them could quickly pay off all the debts. Edward is surprised and realizes everything happened just as his father planned, and the man laughs, saying it's no wonder he's a Margrave. The Margrave stated that the stupidity of the Viscount's family regarding the death penalty far exceeded all his expectations. Margraf says this man doesn't yet realize the consequences awaiting him after today's actions and bold words. The man raises a glass of alcohol to his lips while a butler stands behind him with a serious expression. The father says that Tosden and the best farmers will join Ulrika to turn the forbidden land into fertile soil. The son thanks his father for this, and Edward decides to bring up Sonia, prompting the father to ask what he plans to do. Edward says it might be better to part ways with her, but he's worried they might never see each other again. The father advises Edward to tell this to his beloved in person, but Edward doesn't understand what his father means and looks at the door in surprise. Ulrika points to a girl who just entered the room looking quite upset. Edward loudly calls out his beloved's name, while Sonia softly utters her lover's name with a sad expression, clutching her fist to her chest. The girl starts to apologize, saying it's all her fault, but Edward insists it's his and tells her not to worry. He's going to leave and she'll have to stay here. Sonia throws herself into her lover's arms, shouting that she will go with him too, but Edward manages to stop her by calling her name. The girl says that to be happy, she needs to always be by Edward's side. She looks him straight in the eyes with tears streaming down her cheeks, while he gazes warmly at his beloved. The girl says she will always be by Edward's side, and the boy replies that he wants it just as much as his beloved does. The Margravine tells Tosden they need to settle something before heading to the Forbidden Lands, and Tosden agrees, placing his hand on his chest and covering one eye. In a church, a man asks Edward, dressed in a suit, and Sonia, in a wedding dress, if they promise to love and support each other through sickness and health, even in foreign lands. Everyone joyfully responds together. Sonia cries tears of happiness. Edward stands beside his wife with a satisfied smile. The guests cheer for them and raise their mugs. Edward's father nods contentedly while wiping away tears, and Ulrika genuinely rejoices for the newlyweds. Right now, you see the house where the whole family lives. It's been a year since Edward and the others left, and Edward bursts into the house, barely catching his breath, loudly calling for his wife. A young mother is sitting in the room with a priestess and an older woman holding a baby wrapped in a blanket. She tells the man they have a son, and the baby suddenly starts crying loudly in her arms. Everyone in the room is happy for Edward and Sonia. Edward wipes a tear away and says, "Sonia did a great job." Thanking her, she offers to hold his son, and the old lady dressed as a priestess smiles warmly, touched by the heartfelt moment. A man smiles, picks up the child, and says his son is a real champ too. Edward gently holds the baby in his big hands while Sonia watches happily, laughing with delight. Edward notices the child has black hair, even though his own is golden and Sonia's is chestnut, and the child looks at his father as if spellbound. Grandma smiles and says it's very rare for children to be born looking nothing like their parents. The priestess looks stern and sharply asks Edward if he suspects his wife of cheating, to which he steps back in surprise and insists he would never think that about his beloved. A man lifts a child with both hands and announces they will name him Luca, while his wife smiles happily sitting on the bed. They now live together in this house as a family, and Edward says this family means a lot to him now. Edward is plowing the field with other men when people run up to him, at first addressing him as before, but quickly correcting themselves to speak to him as the elder. Edward initially wants to respond the old way, but remembers his new role and changes his tone. Then the elder warns that Luke's life is in danger, leaving Edward stunned by the news. The Holy Father says Luke can die now because he's only used his inner magical powers, and from the house, a loud voice, probably Edward's, asks what the Holy Father meant by that. The priest says that if nothing is done, their newborn son will die. Edward asks how they can save Luca, while Sonia grabs her head in disbelief. The man says that the magical powers of both parents can awaken the child's own magic. Sonia and Edward ask about their abilities, and the Holy Father confirms that the child will definitely have power. Edward and Sonia sit on either side of Luke, channeling their magical power to him. Edward urges Luke to hold on, saying he's ready to give him all his magic, adding that Luke is his family, his son, and he won't give him up to anyone, not even God. Luke's parents, tears of joy in their eyes, watch their son who survived and opened his eyes, looking straight at them. Edward says that no matter what happens, his dad will always protect him, and the whole village stretches out before them like an open palm. Luca has grown quite a bit. He raises both hands and tells his parents it's time to go, his face calm and peaceful. Dad and Mom waved goodbye to their son. Luca wished Lena good morning while holding a small bag, and Lena returned the greeting, carrying her own little bag. Sonia says that Houston's granddaughter and Roger's daughter are friends with their son. The girl's mother passed away, so Roger brought her with him to this village. The woman says there's still something off with Luke. Edward is surprised and asks if she means what happened in childhood, but his wife replies no, they've already dealt with that. Luke helps out in the field, but people say he mumbles to himself and seems to be casting spells, as if it's a tough workout. While working with his tools, he grumbles angrily that life is the best thing for him in this new world. Sonia covers her face with her hands and starts crying because their son with Edward doesn't smile at all, unlike other children, while Edward looks at his wife confused, not understanding what happened. Luke's mother says again that their son never smiles. We see Luke staring off into space, and Edward, who thought everything was fine because he had a family, hadn't even noticed this in his son, so he hugs his wife to comfort her. Edward and Sonia bring their son to the Holy Father and priestess at the temple, where a sacred tree also grows. A woman approaches Luke, introducing herself as Ulrich's sister, and Luke greets her by name while his parents stand behind him. Luke wonders if this is a sacred tree and says it's very beautiful, while the boy keeps his eyes fixed on its branches. We make a small hole in the little ball, hold it in our hands, say it's candy made from the honey of a sacred tree, and offer Luca a taste. He tries the honey and says it's really sweet. Then the priestess laughs and asks Luca to show her all his magical powers. The priestess is very surprised and says everything is fine, there are no problems, so Luca and his mom can safely go home while his dad has to stay here for now. Sonia thanks the priestess, they see the guests off, and Edward wonders why he's the only one left. The Holy Father is stunned as the priestess lunges at Father Luke so fast her headdress flies off and she grabs him by the throat before he can react or say a word. Ulrika asks why there's binding magic on the meadow, and it turns out it's not a divine pact, but a deal with the devil himself, while Edward clenches his teeth, trying to understand what Ulrika's sister means. Edward doesn't understand where the devil's contract on the meadow came from. He insists he would never do such a thing to his family, especially his son, while the priestess still holds Luke's father by the throat, and the Holy Father addresses her. The priestess releases the man and apologizes, explaining that Edward is not like that at all. Edward replies that it's okay, and he's glad they could come to an understanding, while the Holy Father stands behind the priestess with Ulrika. He asks what the priestess meant by mentioning a deal with the devil, and she replies that she sensed something unusual in him. This is a negative force linked to magic. The priestess says that when the onion ran out of power, a crack appeared, letting this bad energy seep through. And the Holy Father explains that Luke has truly exhausted both his magical power and his childhood. Edward shouts that he was healed thanks to his magical power and his wife's support, and he yells loudly, as if he's starting to understand something. Edward freezes in shock, realizing he's under a binding spell, and that what happened to Luca was his own fault. The priest explains that now everything is clear. When Luke passed the magical power to his son, the contract magic took effect within him, so that's how the magical power formed the contract. Edward can't shake the feeling that all of Lucas's problems are his fault, and he even recalls a past incident when Viscount's son mentioned the death penalty for breaking a contract. The Holy Father asks if the priestess's power can heal him, but Ulrika replies that unfortunately, it cannot and might even harm him, putting Luke's life at risk. Edward then asks what to do next, and the priestess advises them to just watch and wait. The priestess says that once Edward fulfills his contract and pays full compensation for all the goods from this forbidden land, Luke's contract can be completely nullified. Ulrika's sister says it's better to ask for help than try to cancel the contract alone. For Luke, it's a relief that his father and the whole family are now looking out for him, while Edward looks serious. The priestess promises to do everything she can to help him, and Edward bows his head, sincerely thanking Ulrika. Edward, along with Sonia and Luca, seems to be heading out for a picnic. Sonia is wearing a hat, and the man carries a big backpack full of supplies, while my dad believes everything will be just fine. He goes fishing with Luca, helping his son pull fish from the water, believing that by staying close, he can protect him. Edward holds the reins while sitting on his horse, with a slightly scared Luca in front of him. The father reassures his son that everything will be fine as long as he's by his side. His father wants to tell Luke to forget forever about anyone who ever looks at him sideways throughout his life. Luke is Edward's favorite son. The whole family sits under a tree enjoying tasty sandwiches, with Mom chewing and smiling at everyone. Dad gently pats Luke's head while his son looks up at him with admiration. And now they're all together at home again as Luke calls for his dad, who comes over. Sonia smiles gently at her family and says they have a baby girl, while a woman holds the newborn who suddenly starts crying loudly. Luca looks at the baby with surprise. Edward loudly announces they will name her Alice, while the priestess and grandmother smile happily in the room, and Edward helps Luca hold Alice, his new little sister. The boy gently rocks Alice and sings her a lullaby until she falls asleep. Now that Alice has grown up, Luca plays with her toys, and as his sister has grown a bit too, he holds her hand while walking through the grass outside, with Edward and Sonia watching all this with pure joy. Luca finally smiles as he uses his magic to create water figures while sitting on the ground with his legs tucked in, and Alice, happy too, smiles and reaches out to touch the watery shapes. Edward thanks Sonia. His wife looks at him with tears in her eyes, and Edward also thanks his daughter and son. His children, no matter what holds him with contract magic, as tears stream down his cheeks and fall to the floor. Edward has a family, and is incredibly happy. He hugs his loved ones with a genuine smile. Sonia holds Alice close in her arms, leaning against her husband, while Luca places his hand on his father's chest, looking at him intently. Now this family is truly happy. Our moment has come. The man looks up at Luke and his puppets with surprise, as Luke explains that his daily training paid off and now he can control all 3 puppets at once. But then he hears a signal while working. The main character explains that he uses wind magic to send voice commands, and hopes that one day he'll even be able to create melodies this way, while Edward admits he knows Luke loves practicing magic and awkwardly scratches the back of his head. Despite everything, the man yells that it's too noisy around. Luca flinches at his father's words, and his dolls mimic his scared posture, while the man behind Edward just smiles nervously. Luke's father says wind magic is only for emergency signals, and all Luke did was scare people for no reason. Luke asks his father for forgiveness, and Edward adds that he should apologize to everyone standing here now. Luca apologizes to the men here, who smile back, forgiving him. Luca's father notices how much his son has learned about magic on his own and realizes that Luca is truly an exceptional son, while Edward understands it's time to let Luca practice magic. The scene takes place inside the church, where the Holy Father thanks everyone for coming today and announces they will discuss one of the most important topics in their lives. Standing at the pulpit with Sister Ulrika by his side, Sonia sits smiling, watching Luke, Elisa, and Lainale's reactions as they all sit on the same bench, where magic is the most important thing not just in their village, but in the whole world, while Luke looks at his father and the priestess with surprise. A guy in the front row says he can use magic without training, and the Holy Father replies that magic can indeed be used even without much preparation, with everyone listening closely. The Holy Father asks what kind of magic Aiden has, and the boy replies that the simplest magic is the magic of everyday life, deciding to demonstrate it right away. But suddenly the father hits Aiden because the boy burned him, angrily asking what his foolish son is up to. The priest says that the magic of everyday life is called that because it can never fully replace it. Officially, this magic is known as the magic of creation, and there are 4 main elements: water, fire, earth, and air, that anyone can use. Luca thoughtfully rests his index finger on his chin, and his little sister mimics him. In that moment, he realizes that all along, by making dolls from water and earth, he was using the magic of ordinary things. The Holy Father says there were other kinds of magic, reaching out to Adam's hand, while Aiden's father looks slightly shocked by the Holy Father's behavior. With life magic, for example, you can heal wounds. This magic works on everyone except the caster, as the Holy Father showed Adam when he healed his burned fingers, which the boy had injured, apparently using everyday magic. He didn't thank the Holy Father and said he no longer felt any pain. Luca thought for a moment, resting his fingers on his chin, and concluded that even magic has its different forms. The Holy Father says that the God of life also holds the magic of life, then suddenly lets out a fart and adds that it's all just too simple, making everyone around burst into laughter as they look at him. My dad says it's time to talk more about other types of magic, and everyone in the room needs to learn about enhancements, so everyone is intently watching the Holy Father. Aiden is shouting again about power, claiming he knows how to use it. But his father replies that this is not the kind of strength he thinks it is, leaving Aiden confused and exclaiming in surprise. The Holy Father said that, unfortunately, the boy only increased his own mana. Aiden thought it was probably a joke, but he also wanted to be cool, so he asked his dad what he needed to do. Dad says that to be cool, Aiden needs to train, and then everything will be fine. One day he'll feel a special click throughout his body. That's called unlocking magical limits or learning a new skill. Luke understands what his father means and realizes that he managed to combine the figures he made at the very beginning, which sparked the development of a new skill, going from separate parts to a fully connected figure. But Luke doesn't quite get what the Holy Father means by gaining skills. He starts to fart, while Lineal watches with curiosity as Luke daydreams, staring off into the distance. Luke thinks this name reminds him of games from his past life, while Alice has already fallen asleep in her mother's arms, who is also looking at Luke with surprise. The Holy Father asks everyone present if anyone knows about the magic that grants strength and the God who holds this power. Aiden thought the magic was called enhancement magic, just like God is sometimes called that, but his father told him he was wrong. Meanwhile, Luke sat deep in thought, seriously considering how to answer the Holy Father's question. Sonia holds her sleeping daughter Alice in her arms, while Luca looks at Renali in surprise as she raises her hand and says, "It's the magic of power and the God of strength." Their father confirms it's true. Luca remarks that it's really impressive, and the girl blushes slightly. It's very important to strengthen your body and improve your reaction, and only one country describes the magic of power using the words ki and aura. The Holy Father says there is the magic of creation, the magic of life, the magic of power, and many other kinds of magic. His sister still stands behind him, and everyone listens closely. My father still says there's a powerful magic that today you can only read about in books, or hear in legends. This is about the magic of creation, a power that controls everything in the world. The wizard holds a book in one hand and points his staff at a bird, guiding it. The Holy Father says that besides the 4 main elements, there are also qualities of light and darkness, each linked to one of the known elements. So these qualities are water, fire, air, earth, darkness, and light. There are many ways to identify a property, such as using spells, magic circles, or various techniques. The Holy Father explains that the miracle of creation might seem like magic, but in truth, this magic is controlled by God the Creator. The priest adds that the magic of creation doesn't require anything special. It works solely through the imagination of the one who uses it. The Holy Father says that those who already know how to use magic understand well how easy and convenient it is. Luke wonders if his magic turns his own thoughts into reality, and if that means he has the power of creation magic, recalling all his water dolls and clay helpers. Scratching his head, Aiden asked the Holy Father what makes ordinary magic, used in everyday life, different from creation magic, since both can produce things like fire or water, and the Holy Father praised Adan for his thoughtful and important question. The priest says that God the Creator is responsible for the miracle of the world's creation, and all his gifts make people's lives much easier. There is a power that can create the 4 basic elements: fire, water, earth, and air. But many people confuse the magic of creation with the simple magic of everyday life, like warming by a fire, drinking fresh water, or enjoying a gentle breeze. The Father raises his hand to the candle, lights it with his finger using magic, and explains that magic in everyday life follows certain rules. And now he's going to show how. The Holy Father can light a candle and it will burn, but the power of creation works in a completely different way. Here, Luca starts to listen more closely, while his sister is still asleep. But with the magic of creation, the Holy Father can summon fire itself. He shaped flames into a fiery bird and sent it soaring forward, and Aiden exclaimed that it was simply incredible. The Father explains that if you completely drain all the mana from such a fire, it will instantly go out as if it was never there. Just like the fire of the phoenix disappears when he simply snaps his fingers. With a simple bit of magic, a person can make drinking water for themselves. They take a glass, fill it with water, and drink. It refreshes them. However, using creation magic won't give you drinkable water. It would be like trying to drink air. You might hold a glass of water, but you still won't quench your thirst. Aiden says that everyday magic is far more useful than creation magic. His father warns him not to boast, since he hasn't mastered it yet, and the priest agrees that the boy is right. The magic of everyday life is the very essence of living, a gift from the kind goddess who created the whole world for us. Luke's face now shows surprise and even a clear understanding of what's happening. He finally gets it. Basically, when mana fades, the object created by this magic disappears too, but it seems there are some additional details to consider. The clay dolls Luca made never disappeared, even when he ran out of mana. They just stopped moving but kept their perfect shape, and Luca clearly remembers working hard while his father said those dolls looked creepy. So, he was still using ordinary, everyday magic, not creation magic, and Luca was completely confused and didn't understand anything. In the end, Luca still didn't understand anything but silently thanked him. Some people in the room laugh and smile, while the Holy Father adds that there is one key difference between these 2 types of magic. Each requires using different parts of the body. The crown holds the power of God's life. The forehead stores the power of God's covenant. The throat controls the creation of magic. The heart also contains the power of God's life. Above the navel lies the power of God's might, and below the navel is the mana reservoir that directs it to the needed part of the body. Aiden thought for a moment and finally admitted he still didn't understand, which made everyone laugh. And the Holy Father explained that there are many types of magic, and knowing the purpose of each helps a wizard learn and grow much faster. The magic of creation, or the magic of everyday life, is the power of the 4 elements, and once created, it can work on its own without the mage's involvement. The magic of strength, or as I like to call it, the aura, enhances the body and sharpens all of a person's senses. The magic of life heals others' wounds. It's the magic of creation, or as some call it, the magic of all existence, containing the power of 6 main elements but fading without mana to sustain it. Suddenly, the Holy Father asks Luca to step forward and show his magical abilities. Surprised to be called, Luca receives good luck wishes from Lanil and a joking warning from Aiden not to get burned, while he responds with confidence. The Holy Father asks Luca to show any spell he knows. Luca says he'll do something simple, as the Holy Father just wants to check how quickly Luca's abilities are developing, and the sister immediately guesses his intention. Luca stretches both hands forward and forms a water figure that Alice really likes, while the priest and priestess watch him closely. The girl woke up instantly, as if she hadn't slept at all, and immediately called the doll by name. Her name is Pun. The Holy Father says Luke has truly incredible everyday magic. Luca asks his father in surprise if this really isn't creation magic, because it looks just like it. The priestess tells Luke that everyday magic lets you create different shapes, mainly spheres and cubes, a gift from the god of creation to make life easier, while her sister plays with the figures, spinning them on her fingers. Luke closes his eyes and realizes he has learned to control everyday magic and shape it in different ways. But creating a firebird like the Holy Father did is impossible with ordinary magic. Luca says it's easier to use everyday magic than to create human dolls and make them move, while his sister looks at him in surprise, completely not understanding what he means. The priestess is amazed and can't believe her ears. Everyday magic is just a small part of the creator God's power who made this world, and humans can't compare to God. Only God has the right to use this magic to create something like a human. A farmer rushes into the church holding a round stone that Luca had once made in a fit of anger and despair, showing it to everyone and explaining he found it on the edge of the village, something he had never seen before. Luca is very surprised because he recognizes his stone. The priest asks what it is, since it looks more like a jewel, and the priestess asks to see it more closely. Sister Ulrika carefully examines the stone, touches it with her index finger, and says the stone responds to mana. The Holy Father says this is a very unusual stone, and the sister replies that it seems completely harmless. But Ulrich's sister says it's best to leave that strange stone alone, and everyone looks at her in surprise. Lucas realizes he forgot about this stone and rushed through everything, acting more on emotion than thought. The priest says their conversation is over for today, and Luca feels embarrassed to bring up the moment with the stone in the field. The Holy Father asks the priestess about Luke's magic, and she replies that the power of his bow is simply incredible, as many children run up to the boy. Create something like a human. Ulrika's sister smiles slightly, thinking that Luca just has an overly vivid imagination. Here you can see a clay doll of Luke lying on the ground, but the priestess is sure it's impossible to create anything that truly resembles a real person. A weary and frightened man arrives at Margrave Christopher Eckelma's house, reporting that after 10 years of searching, they have finally found the body of the Viscount's son. The Margrave says the Viscount's son's carriage plunged off a cliff into the enchanted forest and offers his condolences, adding that he's heard of a terrible monster living there, to which the man replies that the Viscount has endured much sorrow. The Viscount asks if he can build a tomb for his son, and the Margrave replies that of course he can, and there was no need to ask. The Margrave then reflects on who might be to blame for the tragedy, but concludes that it no longer matters. Markgraf insists that perhaps it was even a blessing from God, since the man's son always did whatever he wanted until his death, and says the boy should be buried with full honors while the Viscount thanks him. Markgraf tells Nicholas he'll also attend the memorial, and Nicholas suggests combining the visit with the next inspection by coordinating the schedule with the Viscount. Markgraf notes, as usual, Nicholas organizes everything quickly and efficiently, which is no surprise. Nicholas, the second son of Tauston, shows a notebook with the Vigraf schedule, and the man wonders if he can just look at the schedule like that, saying his life is constantly at risk, as befits a Margrave. This isn't what the Viscount meant. The Margrave says nothing bad will happen, and if it does, it's better for a criminal to suffer. Plus we can't waste soldiers and people since they're the country's strength, while the Viscount nervously insists it must be a joke. Nicholas says you shouldn't have angered the Count like that. The Margrave replies that he's so full of self-pity he'd be willing to kill his own son, which only angers the man more. And when asked about his son and grandson, Nicholas says they're regaining their strength in the village. The Margrave asks Nicholas to send his greetings to his father and brother Roger, and Nicholas promises he will. The Margrave looks to the sky with hope, believing Ed and Luca will stay strong and resist the curse. A tree with a thick trunk covered in countless flowers stands in the middle of a large meadow also blanketed with blooms, where a girl with elven ears starts laughing and says she can definitely feel something special here. She smiles contentedly, looks ahead, and says she feels the power of the magical crystal as flower petals swirl around her. She sees a magical crystal and wonders who could have made it. Before her stretches a vast area of mountains and forests, fenced off and marked with a sign. A creepy forest. Trees bent into an arch, slime covering the ground, a centipede crawling nearby, beetles scurrying around, and mosquitoes buzzing through the air. The Viscount holds a knife to protect the house and blames all their troubles on his foolish son, who didn't understand what his father was doing, shouted from the cart, and caused the horse to bolt off the cliff, breaking this very fence. This slime starts to grow and turns into a creature called Count's son. It claims it's not evil but will never forgive Edward. A smiling girl looks ahead happily, points with her fingers, and hums a tune. The girl presses the keys one by one with her fingers, playing the notes C, D, and the high E. She's dancing a little, enjoying the music with a smile, while a dark-haired guy sits nearby, pointing somewhere and talking. The girl presses the next FA key, and the main character uses wind magic to create air blocks. The main character and the girl are sitting on the floor, while a few people chat behind them at the table. Archie presses the keys and the boy makes a sound. Archie keeps stubbornly pressing different buttons while the boy continues making sounds. But the system didn't last long. The guy is already feeling a bit dizzy, imagining how cool it would be if Fusion could make the keys play sounds on their own. Archer turns to his surprised brother, realizing the feeling is like controlling a tiny person in his hands. He remembers a man smiling and telling him that one day he'd feel a strange click in his body, and after that, the magical limits would disappear or new abilities would emerge. Archie feels even happier now that everything comes to him faster. The calm main character explains that it's because the keys now produce sound on their own, a power within him that makes his thoughts clearer, which is why he doesn't want to stop learning magic. One of the men at this table speaks seriously to the children, asking them to be quieter because Toastjin has arrived. A boy holding his head apologizes to Mr. Toastjin and also says sorry to Ars. The man in the shirt says everything's fine since he'll be leaving soon, thanks them for their time, and says goodbye to Edward and Sonia, while the man and woman smile and say they understand. Toasting steps out of a wooden house in the middle of the forest, and Luca asks Edward what they were talking about. Edward replies that next time his grandfather will be visiting them. Luca stands up and asks if Grandpa is carrying out the Margrave's orders. Archie is happy that Grandpa will be here soon. Edward confirms that Grandpa serves the Margrave and oversees the harvest in the villages, while Sonia clears the dishes from the table. The main character is curious about what her grandmother does and happily repeats the word grandma. Edward laughs and says she's resting now and living with her grandfather, while Sonia replies that it's still kind of unexpected, and the man explains it's all because of the monsters. A man recalls a forest full of stones and explains that monsters from the enchanted forest have started appearing elsewhere, causing local animals to flee in large numbers, and Edward believes they're afraid of something. Monsters are a humanoid race skilled in magic, with human-like bodies and faces that show only white eyes and a mouth. Magical creatures are beings that can use magic. The dark dog lowered its head. The main character wonders if all this will affect their village, while Archie, scared, grabs his cheeks and says something bad is coming, and she is truly frightened. Luca hugs his sister while Edward smiles and reassures her that everything is fine because their village is protected by a sacred tree keeping monsters at bay. And since the village was founded, only forest wolves have been seen here. It's starting to get dark outside. Edward soothes the little girl, telling her not to worry, and asks the children to wash their hands and settle down quietly for bed. It's getting dark outside. Edward and Sonia sit at the table while a man with a mug and bottle nearby, wearing a serious expression, hopes nothing will happen when the old man arrives, and Sonia admits that the rumors about magical beasts scare her. Sonia, with worry on her face, says she just wants to live together with everyone in peace and harmony. Edward agrees with her, and then everyone turns their attention to Luke, who is standing in the middle of the room yawning. They're surprised the kids aren't asleep yet. Luca is holding a crying girl, and the main character explains she got scared by the monster story. The main character apologizes, saying he never intended to be out at night, while Edward and Sonia look at him in surprise. Edward lifts Luke into his arms, laughing and saying there's no need to apologize because they're family and sometimes it's okay to stay up late together. Sonia, holding Arte, agrees that as long as they're all together, Arte won't be afraid. A man raises his thumb, smiles, and tells the kids that if a monster shows up, he'll definitely take care of it, and Archie agrees. The girl smiles and says her brother will protect them, but the angry father replies that he will be the one to protect her. Luke notices a bottle on the table and asks his father if it's alcohol. Edward confirms it is, and explains that the drink is made from a magical herb, which gives it its unique flavor. All four are sitting at the table. Luca asks again about that magical flavor, and his father explains it's hard to describe, but every food with mana has that special taste. The wolf they recently ate had a strange magical flavor. It turned out to be a wolf with unusual fur, and its meat was roasted. A boy watches his dad slowly pour a drink, and Edward says the feeling is amazing, so he drinks a little and enjoys it. The main character thinks about how he only drinks a little of this beverage just to taste it, and recalls seeing similar tasting sets like this in Japan. Suddenly, a bottle and several small glasses crash onto the table, surprising everyone, except the main character, who hasn't noticed yet. All four of them look suspiciously at the things that suddenly appeared out of nowhere, and Luca, who has also opened his eyes, asks what they are. He'll be surprised to see a glass bottle and shot glasses on the table, appearing there just as he thought about them. Edward pulls himself together and asks why this is needed, and the main character replies that it's usually used for drinking alcohol. The man smiles at the boy and says these things were made with magic and will soon disappear. He promises to use them and thanks the boy for helping Sonia, while the mother says he's simply amazing. The main character ignores their words because the only thing that amazes him is how he managed to do it. Although he imagined a glass bottle with clumps inside, the image only flashed briefly in his mind. Luke wonders if this is what the priest meant by developing skills, when your imagination can actually become reality. The guy wonders why this is happening right now, maybe because of a familiar image. But no, that doesn't seem to be it. he starts to feel a little dizzy. Everyone stays seated at the table. Ars asks where her portion is, and everyone looks at her in surprise. A tearful little girl points to herself and asks where her group is and why no one is there for her. Edward and Sonia return to Luke, who clutches his head in fear, having realized everything. He keeps holding his head, and while Luca would gladly make another one for Arch, he has no idea how he managed to do it the first time. A tearful girl looks at her brother and asks again where her stack is. The boy tells her not to cry and says he'll figure something out. The main character reaches out their hands, and a glowing orb appears before them, capturing everyone's amazed attention. His father smiles, wondering if Luca is really using mana right now, while Sonia looks at him in amazement, unable to understand how that's even possible. Mom realizes that the noise in the church was caused by the stone Luke threw, when suddenly a beautiful, smooth sphere appears. Everyone is looking at the ball and smiling. The guy says it turned out well and asks our boss if everything is okay. A girl happily reaches out to a glowing orb, saying it's a beautiful stone and thanking her brother. Suddenly, a beam of light shines down on the table, and in its center, a man with pointed ears appears on his knees, picking up a stone and smiling as he studies it closely, leaving everyone stunned. Suddenly a man appears, looks over the ball, and with a smile says everything looks great. The young man looks at her in surprise, while his parents glare at him angrily. Luca can't understand how she could have appeared so suddenly. Sonia grabs Archie in her arms, causing the chair she was sitting on to fall. Edward clenches his fist and angrily demands to know who he is, while Archie starts crying and reaches out because his stone was taken away. It's nighttime outside, and a girl in a dress stands before a huge tree with thick foliage. She lifts her head and asks the sacred Sarithri why he called her so late at night, sensing his overwhelming joy and wondering what is happening. Suddenly, a pillar of light appears before her, and from it emerges the same man who had appeared in Luke's house. The girl looks at him in surprise. She is amazed by her appearance and realizes the incredible power it holds. At first, seeing the girl who appeared, she thinks she might be an elf, but then she understands she is not. The girl realizes she's facing a tall elf who raises his hand, looks at the tree, and says it's a sacred tree. A girl in a dress bows to him, addressing him as Lord and introducing herself as Ururika, a half-elf serving as the priestess of the sacred Syra tree. The elf raises his hand to stop her and asks not to waste time on formalities. He looks at Ulrika and tells her that Syra is a beautiful name, but the tree's true name must remain secret because it's tied to its life force, and as a priestess she must protect it. Ulrika agrees with the elf but asks what brought him here, and he replies with the name Aliyah, which surprises her. The elf smiles at Ulrika and says she can call him Aliyah, because if he said his full name, they'd be sitting here till morning. Ulrika agrees and asks why he's here. Aliyah steps in front of the girl and says she wants to see the thing she recently got, and the girl asks her to repeat that. The elf apologizes to Ulrika, explaining that he perceives time differently since it was only a few days ago for him, and he adds that the object is round. The girl realizes what Aliyah is, that mysterious stone the main character summoned. Ulrika apologizes to him because she already gave that stone to the village chief. All the goods made here go to the Margrave, and Aliyah says it's a shame. Ulrika asks the elf if the stone has any special powers, and Aliyah raises her finger, ready to explain. Aliyah smiles and admits there's actually nothing special about the stone. Ulrika says with surprise that now everything makes sense, and the elf smiles, adding that the real magic lies not in the stone, but in the one who made it. Ulrika looks at the elf with surprise, pondering his words about someone having created him. Aliyah touches his temple with her finger and says she feels something. Suddenly, a beam of light shines on him, and he disappears. Ulrika places her hand on the damp tree, silently asking for help to find Miss Relia's trail. As she closes her eyes and holds her head, she suddenly realizes she's found it. She sees a house ahead and realizes it's Luke's home, with hills and trees behind it and a tree with a roof standing in front. The girl runs away and tells the tree she's leaving, while Ulrika hopes the elf won't cause any trouble there. Sonia holds the scared, crying Archie while Edward points his sword at the elf holding the stone, with the table covered in complete chaos. The sinister Edward asks Ali if he's an elf and what he's doing here, warning that he won't let anyone harm his family, while Edward realizes he didn't even notice Ali moving. Probably magic. Aliyah holds a stone in front of her, smiles, and says that this very stone is the reason she came here. Tearful Archie waves her arms, insisting the stone is hers because her brother made it just for her. Their mom asks her to calm down. Luca urges him to give the stone back to his sister, while Aliyah and Edward watch in surprise. The main character looks seriously at the elf, who returns the gaze with a sly smile, making the hero realize that the message is meant for him. Aliyah approaches the boy, gently holds his head, and asks if he made this stone. Edward lunges forward angrily with his sword, ordering the elf to keep his hands off his son or face the consequences, and the elf blocks the sword with his hand. Aaliyah raises her hand in front of her as a broken sword tip flies past, apologizing for scaring them. Edward, holding a broken sword, looks at the elf in shock, while Aaliyah silently hopes not to anger the half-elves, knowing they're no match for them. The elf looks seriously at the stunned man, warning that it's best not to anger the elves, or the whole country will perish and no one will survive. The main character, with a stern look, tells the elf his name is Luca, and asks for his name, and if he really is an elf, as his father said, while Edward looks at his son in surprise. Aaliyah stands before the boy with a friendly smile, telling him he really is an elf, and that he can just call her Aaliyah. Then Luca says he has one more question to ask. Luca asks Aaliyah why he came here and scared his family, while Aaliyah looks at him in surprise and the boy's family watches nervously. A boy tells an elf that he made his sister cry, and Arch looks at his brother and starts crying too. The main character also tells the elf that he's made him angry, and the elf looks at the boy seriously. Aaliyah bowed slightly to fate and apologized. She was just so curious that she ran here without thinking. The elf hands Archie a stone ball, asking her to take it because it belongs to her, and the girl happily accepts it, thanking the elf. Aaliyah smiles and says he didn't mean to scare anyone, then asks if someone can help him, curious about how people show they're sorry, while Luca and his father look at him seriously. Uruha runs to Luke's house and his family. Struggling to breathe and completely exhausted, she rushes up to Mr. Aaliyah. Ulrika enters the house, surprised to see Ali on his knees asking the family to accept his sincere apologies. Luke explains that this posture shows true remorse, while Edward looks at Ulrika and calls her sister. Edward asks Ulrika if she knows that elf, pointing to the bent Alia, which surprises her, while Archie smiles and plays with a small stone. Ulrika, with a serious expression, says that even the king must bow before this elf, revealing that he is a high elf, which surprises everyone. Edward, Sonia, and Ulrika kneel beside Aaliyah with regret, apologizing for their ignorance and saying they didn't mean to upset him. But the elf asks them to stop, insisting that he is the one who should be apologizing, while Ars and Lucas watch the scene in confusion. Luke looks at the tall elf in surprise. He had no idea he was an elf, and he didn't even know his sister was half-elf. Everyone sat down at the table. Ulrika apologized to the boy with her eyes closed, not wanting to scare the villagers, so she said nothing, while Aaliyah added that people often spread rumors about elves, which made them feared, even though elves rarely get angry. Ulrika looks at the main character with pity and asks if he's afraid of her, but Luke firmly denies it. He looks at the tall elf woman drinking from her mug and says that Aaliyah isn't scary either. They just needed to talk. Aaliyah smiles. A tall high elf reaches out his hand to the boy, smiling warmly and saying he wants to be friends, while everyone around watches in surprise. Archie holds the stone and smiles. Aaliyah says his magical crystal is amazing, but Luke insists it's just an ordinary rock with no special powers. Aaliyah looks at the boy and asks what he means, saying that just because he has no superpowers doesn't make him worthless. To her, he's a true masterpiece, and Luca looks at her, surprised and curious. Suddenly, the elf jumps up, startling everyone around, and quickly begins excitedly telling them about the magical crystal. Aaliyah stretches both hands forward and continues telling the big story about the crystal. Everyone watches her in awe, while Luca asks her to keep it brief. The elf says he'll show them everything in practice now. Light begins to glow in Ailey's hands, and a sword appears before her. Blushing, Aaliyah holds up the wooden sword she just made and says it took a lot of her magical energy to create it. The elf starts to get angry, raises his sword, and says that's why crafting items is one of the hardest parts of creation magic, while Ulrika asks him to stop. Aaliyah looks at the girl angrily and asks what she wants, since he just started, while the family is very grateful to him for explaining everything so clearly. But not everyone knows enough to understand the elf, and everyone was amazed by how much the elf shared. The elf sarcastically notes they have too much enthusiasm, and says he'll repeat everything again. Aaliyah awkwardly holds her head and hands the sword to Edward, explaining it's a gift and an apology for meddling, and Edward thanks him. Edward smiles at the elf and says he understands the interest in the bow's power, promising to talk to the village chief and try to buy it. Meanwhile, Luke's mother tells him it would have been easier if he had told the truth at church, and Luke apologizes. Aaliyah smiles happily and asks her dad if it's really true, and he replies that he's very happy and thanks them. The main character smiles as he looks at the elf, hardly believing they ever feared him. It's still night, and Edward says it's late, so they should go, with Ulrika agreeing. A coachman drives a carriage pulled by 2 horses, with hills and trees visible behind. Inside sit an elderly man and a woman wearing glasses, as the man adjusts his tie and says the Viscount's son's funeral went well. and the woman agrees, addressing him as the master. A woman with a serious expression adjusts her glasses and says she's still not sure if the Viscount's family is really involved in Edward's incident. She simply can't let her beloved grandchildren become pawns in a deadly pact. Her husband says it's about respecting aristocratic laws, and while she understands, something inside won't let her accept it. But he thinks it's the stubbornness of her half-elf blood speaking. The woman with glasses is named Carolina. She's a half-elf and the head maid in this man's house with many duties, and she's also Ulrika's sister, a priestess from the village of Traum. She is also his mother-in-law and Edward's grandmother, and their relationship is very complicated. Family tree. Christopher explains that his wife, who is also Edward's mother, is Carolina's daughter from her first marriage, and she is now married to the village head, Traum. Now she wants to pretend she's his wife, which means she's Luke and Archie's grandmother. Carolina tells us they've already arrived, and Christopher asks the coachman to stop the carriage right here. Christopher and Carolina step out of the carriage into the fresh air. Christopher wonders how many people are here, though he doesn't specify whom he means, and the woman replies that there are about 200. The man calmly says that there are more of them than he expected as a crowd of armed people approaches. One of them, a bearded man wearing a Viking helmet and holding a sword, says they'll take the woman and money later. But first, he orders his men to kill the old man. Christopher says they attacked knowing they were facing nobles. He's not sure if it was bravery or foolishness, but Carolina thinks it was more likely foolishness. The horde leader tells them he doesn't care about their status, points his sword at them, and orders his men to attack. Christopher tells them that now they will learn why they became aristocrats. Then he stretches out his hand, and a magical flash appears in his palm. A lightning strike hits the leader of the crowd, knocking him back and causing him to drop his sword. Lying there coughing, he asks if that was magic. Christopher stands in shock, amazed he's still alive, and tells the man to lift his head. The kneeling man says that even with magic, killing 200 people at once is impossible, so Christopher points and asks him to look around. Behind him lie all his men, already killed by Christopher's magic. The man asks in shock, "What is this?" Christopher says it's all magic. Unable to move, he keeps staring at the dead people. Carolina adjusts her glasses and, with a serious look, says the blow was so strong it felt like hitting a stone slab, enough to take down many people. A man falls to the ground, laughing nervously, while Carolina explains that the true power of the aristocrats lies not in authority, but in magic, and Christopher adds that magic alone can take down an entire army. Christopher, with a grim expression, says that aristocrats are no different from monsters guarding their wealth. The carriage drives away, and Christopher says he thought the Viscount sent them, but that's not all. They actually decided to act because of a monster that appeared from the enchanted forest. Christopher and Caroline sit facing each other. She explains that many refugees fled their homes because of monster attacks, and Christopher replies that he first heard about the monster 10 years ago, when the conflict with the Viscount began. He tells the woman that, judging by the direction, he's heading to the village of Traum, and asks if no bounty has been placed on him, why is he still alive? Carolina adjusts her glasses and says they've already tried to find him. But this monster hides well and learns quickly, which makes dealing with him quite a challenge. Christopher asks Caroline if she has found a priestess for the World Tree, and she replies no, explaining that elves and half-elves aren't strong enough for the role. She says that only a high elf fits this role because elves are the ones who created the World Tree, and Christopher asks what makes it different from other sacred trees. He says the World Tree can only reveal its power with a priestess present, which explains their many monster problems. Carolina points out that elves and half-elves can be ruled out until a high elf appears, as they can't help at all. The horses continue pulling the carriage as Christopher suggests that someone with special abilities might appear, and Carolina, surprised, says she's never heard such strange ideas, to which Christopher replies that anything is possible in life. There's a stone made by Luca. Luca and Ars are taking a bath together when Ars notices the stone and says it shines beautifully. It's a mana orb containing elements of water, fire, air, and earth. If you add a certain kind of mana, the color of the orb changes. Water turns blue, fire red, air yellow, and earth brown. Archie is happy, while Luca stands with his hand raised. Suddenly, the main character feels a sharp pain in his chest, clutching it and gasping heavily, while Archie looks at him in surprise. Lately, Luca has been feeling chest pain and wonders if it's more than just physical. When he uses magic, he notices it's become easier to control. Archie, tears in her eyes, begs her brother not to get sick because she can't bear it, and Luca smiles back at her. Luca tells Arsha that everything is fine, and as long as she smiles, he will always be healthy. Arsha looks at the glowing stone Luca picked up, and he promises to always protect her smile. Luca tries to tell Archie that he's her older brother, but stops before finishing, and Archie looks at him closely. The main character looks at his sister and asks if she just heard that voice, but Archie says she didn't hear anything. She never admitted it, but if Luca stopped paying attention to her, she would cry for hours. Luca says he hears that voice again, and somehow it reminds him of the past. Archie looks at his brother in surprise and asks whose voice that is. Lucas says it sounds strange, and their mom orders the kids to leave immediately. In the void lies a thick black liquid, born from a mana orb that now rests on the ground by the wheel, having found its host and entered it. The next head of the Igraf family makes demands to the Margrave, while the man, holding a dagger in one hand, irritably points somewhere with the other. He agreed to these terms only out of respect for the aristocratic law, but nothing stops him from destroying their family in the future. Someone apologizes to their son because it's the only way to survive. A voice asks why he's here, saying it's not his fault. The woman and that man are to blame. The clot began to take on a human shape, repeatedly showing its host memories of despair. Feeding on the mana from that despair, it grew stronger and eventually transformed into a hideous monster, finally managing to form a hand. He took on a human form and looked at the hills and trees, saying that everyone who tried to kill him would still have to answer for their actions. There's a village nestled among forests and hills, and Lucas says he can now make 2 dolls that act on their own without his constant guidance. One doll holds a stone while the other digs the ground with a hoe. Before them stands a thoughtful hero who says he wishes he could train more often. The boy remembers his father telling him that Lucy shouldn't make too many clay figures without a good reason because it scares people. Luke looks at the hoe and suddenly understands something. The main character remembers his bullet and decides to try channeling mana the same way, holding a hoe and aiming to strengthen the tool by directing mana into it. A young man strikes the ground with a hoe, but it breaks. Surprised, he looks at the tool, realizing that Luca thought filling things with mana would be easy, but it's actually much more complicated, like wandering lost in a tangled maze. His father said that, and it seems the properties of this material are changing too. The boy remembers watching his dad train with a sword alongside Ars, who said that Mr. Ilya's sword was incredible. It could even cut through spells. Luca watches the guys approaching him and waving, as one of them asks what he's doing here. A guy tells Luca that starting today, he's also part of the processing team, and the man in the hat adds that he was surprised to learn Luca was the one who made that stone. The boy looks at them with a questioning gaze, feeling awkward, while his dad asks him to say hello to Adam and Jonathan. Luca greets a boy named Aiden and a man wearing a hat named Jonathan. The main character looks at them with suspicion, realizing they're completely ordinary. Jonathan explains that the magical herb absorbs mana, so if Aiden isn't careful, it will drain all his energy, and Aiden asks if he's serious. The guy holds his head and says he probably should have said he was glad to meet them, while his father looks at him. Edward is worried he might get kicked out, so he thinks at least one family member should always keep an eye on him. Edward gently pats his son on the head, who smiles back, while the father asks him not to overdo it. Luca nods and assures him everything will be fine. Luca picks up a stone, thinking he can wrap it in mana, but pouring mana inside is much harder. Glowing patterns appear on the stone, and by channeling mana correctly, you can greatly enhance the item's properties. The guy keeps staring at the stone, thinking it works like amplification, and says he knows his body well enough not to need any other method. He watches the stone start to crack and realizes he poured too much mana into it. Bright mana starts leaking from the cracks in the stone, overflowing wildly, and the main character realizes an explosion is about to happen. A young man holds a stone in one hand while clenching his other fist, doubling his strength by covering his hand with mana. Luca waves his hand, creating waves of air around him as he uses wind magic to block out all sound. Water begins to swirl around the stone, which the hero carefully covered with another stone to keep the debris from flying everywhere. Suddenly, the stone explodes into many small pieces, and the main character squints one eye, watching it closely. The guy holds out his hand, sighs, and admits he was scared, as even the wind around them has died down. Luca has only a few small stone fragments left on his hand, and he says you need to be careful with mana. Suddenly, the young man felt a sharp pain in his chest, got scared, and clutched it with his hands. Clenching his teeth, the main character tries to endure the pain, but can't hold on and starts to fall to the ground. The main character starts to fall and screams, but suddenly someone grabs him from behind by both arms, stopping his fall. Luke thanks the person who saved him and turns around to see his rescuer, only to be very surprised. He looks at his 2 clay figures that help him stand up, puzzled how they saved him without him ever telling them to. The dolls stand before him as Luca raises 2 fingers. The boy realizes he never gave them any command. The dolls raised their hands and began to sway slowly from side to side, just as they always obey Luca. The main character watches them. Lately, he's been giving orders mentally, so he might not even realize he just told them to capture him. Luca is still sitting on the grass, looking ahead. when he spots a few figures and realizes they are his dad Tostin, mom, and Archie, all staring at him in surprise. For some unknown reason, Ars is crying, and the boy wonders why she looks so sad. He quietly promises her that everything will be okay because her older brother is coming soon. Suddenly stopping mid-sentence, Luca feels a sharp pain in his chest and struggles to breathe, confused by the strange sensation inside him. Luca suddenly hears an unfamiliar voice in his head urging him not to go, feeling like a command, and he closes his eyes in pain. A worried father rushes over, grabs his son's shoulder, and asks what happened and if he's okay. Archie, holding back the pain, replies that he's fine, just very tired. Suddenly, his little sister runs up to him, hugs him, and tearfully begs Luke not to lie, which surprises him a lot. She sadly tells him that she doesn't want her brother to get hurt or sick. Sonia says Archa wanted to visit her brother, and during the walk, she suddenly started crying. Edward guesses she probably saw that her brother was sick, and the boy comforts his sister, telling her everything is fine now, while the girl quietly sobs. Edward tells his son he needs to rest because there's only a little work left, and Luca looks at him in surprise, asking why. Tostin announces that the Margrave's representative, Mr. Callisto, has already arrived. Luca asks if his grandfather is here yet, and Ars is happy about it. A few more people approach them, and one asks if it's true that Callisto has already arrived. Edward confirms it, and the man, surprised that Callisto came earlier than promised, asks if something happened. Edward, with a serious look, says that the monster's movements have caused magical creatures to start migrating, and it seems they're heading toward their village. Luke's father stands before the crowd, explaining that they've counted about 100 wolf-like creatures, leaving the people surprised and asking him to repeat. They talk among themselves. One says they're just like that forest wolf. Another says there are too many of them. The main character stands beside his mom and sister with a serious face, lost in thought about magical beasts. Edward tries to calm everyone down, saying everything will be fine. With Mr. Callisto nearby, they'll handle the situation together, so the main thing now is not to panic. Archie hugs Luke and tells him he'll always protect him. Luke is grateful but knows he should have said it first, as the sun is already rising over the mountains. Christopher and Carolina step out of the carriage. Christopher says they arrived without any trouble and suggests they pretend to be elderly, to which Carolina asks for his help with the act. He smiles at her and says he'll have to apologize to her real husband, but Carolina tells him not to worry since they've already agreed on everything, and she reminds him to change his clothes. Carolina transforms into a grandmother, while Christopher pretends to be a hunched old man with a cane. She holds a suitcase. Christopher asks Luke and Ars to wait a moment, then laughs. At the top of the tower, there's a bell. Christopher says it's hard for him to pretend to be an ordinary guy, and Carolina replies that it actually suits him. In the forest, a few wolves with white eyes and huge jaws dripping with saliva roam around, their heads crowned with horns. In the distance, houses appear. Someone says there's a village ahead and they've upset the magical beasts, then sticks out their tongue, joking they might use it. The long-haired creature laughs and says he'll do it, standing beside the wolves with liquid dripping from his hand. Christopher and Caroline knock on Luke's door. Christopher tells Luke and Archie that their grandfather has arrived, and Caroline asks how they're doing. Luca greets his grandma and grandpa. Edward smiles and waves, while Archie is happy to see them. Christopher, also known as Callisto, arrived on behalf of the Margrave. Luca notices he looks a lot like his father, and Callisto asks if they recognize him. Luca looks at Carolina and doubts she's a grandmother. She seems more like a church friend. She tells the kids they've grown so much. The main character points to his grandmother and asks why her ears are so long, wondering if she's an elf. Edward and Sonia look at each other in surprise, while Callisto realizes they haven't been told this yet, and Carolina explains that she's half-elf, so they have elf blood too. Edward and Sonia silently look at each other. RK points to himself and asks if she's an elf, and Luca smiles, saying she kind of is. A thought flashes through Edward's mind. Yes, she really is their great-grandmother, and the elf blood is true. He himself was surprised back then, and their family tree appears before his eyes. Lucas's father smiles, guessing that Carolina and Callisto are tired after their long walk, and suggests they have a bite to eat. Callisto agrees, saying his father is right because his stomach is completely empty, and on the table, several plates of food and lit candles are already waiting. Everyone sat down at the table and started eating. Callisto gently patted the main character's head while Caroline looked at RJ. On the table sits a bottle of alcohol. Callisto smiles as he drinks from his glass, saying it tastes great, and Edward explains it was made recently, so the mana hasn't faded from the drink yet. Callisto would even have walked here just for that. The old man looks at the glass and wonders where they got such a beautiful one, saying it looks like the work of a skilled craftsman. Edward tells Callisto that Luca did it, and the grandfather turns in surprise to look at his grandson. Luke's father says the boy did it by accident using magic, while Callisto scolds him because creating glass with magic is nothing like just lighting a fire. The main character watches them with suspicion, while the grandfather explains that even the simplest things require hard work, and eventually Edward agrees with him. Suddenly, a voice pops into the boy's head, saying he barely managed to get this for his birthday, leaving him surprised. He wonders again where that voice came from, but Callisto interrupts him, asking how he built the structure since it doesn't feel magical at all, and she wonders if it's even magic. Everyone is staring at Luke and his grandpa. The boy admits he doesn't even know how it happened. He just thought about a cup for his dad, and suddenly, it appeared. Callisto asks his grandson if he can do it. The grandfather forms a water bubble on his finger, and Luca recognizes it as simple water magic, saying he can do it too, then repeats the same, creating his own water bubble. The grandfather looks at the boy in surprise, thinking he does it so effortlessly that not a single flaw can be seen. Callisto tells the guy he's had enough and drops a drop of water on the stack. Luca agrees, but pops a balloon instead. The main character hadn't even let go of his hand when Calypso jumped up from the table and, along with Caroline, started watching Luke in shock closely. Caroline asks how he did it, but her grandfather interrupts, wondering where the real water created by the magic of everyday life has gone. The main character looks at them with confusion, not understanding why everyone is so surprised, and confidently replies, "Yes." Edward and Sonia watch Callisto and Carolina while Fright quietly observes and eats. Carolina smiles proudly at her grandson, calls him a true talent, gently pats Callisto on the head and says this is her granddaughter. Edward turns to his wife and says that even Mr. Aaliyah noticed Luke's talent, and Sonia agrees with him. Callisto asks who Mr. Aaliyah is, and Edward explains that he's a high elf who recently broke into their house. Callisto understands everything. After he calmly responded, he and Caroline looked surprised and asked about the elf once again. Caroline asks Edward if it's true, while Grandpa wonders if there's a high elf here. Edward tries to calm them both down, but an irritated Callisto orders Tom not to soothe him. Luke's father says that Ulrika's sister mentioned Mr. Aaliyah has an elvish dream, so now you can't even talk to him. Luke asks his grandfather what an elven sleep is, and his grandfather explains that it's a special state where elves tune their mana to the same frequency as the world's mana. Sitting next to Archie, Carolina explains that elves can sleep for years, or even decades without food or water, and high elves can sleep even longer. Everyone stood up from the table. Edward raised a finger and said he thinks he'll wake up in a month, just when Callisto is set to appear in the village, and Callisto asked how he knew that. Edward recalls the bullet Luca made, and since the rules say it must be handed over to the Margrave, they plan to discuss with Callisto in a month whether it can be given to Mr. Aaliyah. Luca looks at his father, wondering if Aaliyah really decided to sleep until that day. He doesn't understand high elves, and his father says she probably thought waiting a whole month was too hard, so she just went to sleep. It's getting dark outside. Grandpa says it's late, so it's better to greet him tomorrow, and Edward, relieved, says he probably won't be able to wake Aaliyah. Callisto looks sternly at his son and says that the very act of greeting is important, then asks if Edward has forgotten all the rumors about elves, leaving Edward to ponder this. Caroline seriously warns not to anger the half-elves, saying humans aren't their equals, and if the elves get mad, the whole country could be doomed. Carolina and Callisto look shocked at the smiling family. Edward says he remembers this, but assures that everything will be fine with Mr. Ali. Luke notes the tall elf is a bit odd but kind, and Grandpa asks what happened to them. His face grows serious as he says that manners must be observed no matter what, and Callisto thinks to himself, if there's smoke, then somewhere there's fire. Tingles don't just appear out of nowhere, even if he's always friendly. Near a big tree stands a dark figure in a cloak. They say you shouldn't anger the high elves, or no one will survive. And meanwhile, a smiling girl hides in the branches, talking about a bow and a bullet. Callisto joined the villagers to better protect themselves from monsters by building several tall wooden watchtowers, each staffed by a single guard. Several people are stacking stones to build a wall, while others are driving stakes into the ground for protection, just in case anyone tries to attack. They might arrest them. Callisto is firmly scolding her son and another man holding a hammer. The main character points to a wooden screen where an animation appears, while Archie and another girl watch. And meanwhile, Luca plays with magic as the girls look on happily. He also helped around the house. Luca stands in front of his mom carrying a basket. Archie holds a chair, a girl hangs up laundry, and Luca carries a basket of carrots. Overall, his days were calm and peaceful. In the center of the village stands a church, when suddenly a loud sound echoes throughout the whole village. Everything was calm until the alarm sounded, warning of the magical beast approaching. A man in the tower struck something with a hammer, and a loud noise echoed. Callisto, Edward, and another man stand before the crowd, and Edward begins by asking everyone to please stay calm. Serious and angry expressions appeared on everyone's faces as Edward warned that magical monsters are very dangerous, and if they enter the village, many people will suffer. While Archon, Luca, and their mother stood nearby, knowing Edward had already taken steps to protect them. Edward clenches his fist and rallies everyone, saying it's not over yet. This time they have Callisto, an incredible mage sent by the Margrave himself, and he tells the people they have nothing to fear from any beasts. Edward stands confidently, raising his sword high, asking everyone to trust him because this is his home. The sword begins to glow with flames and grows huge. Luke's father tells everyone he will protect the village. Everyone cheers and excitedly shouts the names Edward and Callisto. Edward says if anyone gets hurt, immediately seek out the Holy Father and Sister. They will help and heal, as the Holy Father and Sister stand among the crowd. Cheerful Edward walks up to the family, raises his hands and asks Archie if he's cool. Archie smiles, says yes, and adds that the sword is cool too. Callisto looks at her son's sword in surprise and asks where he got such a weapon filled with mana. Edward laughs and says he was surprised too, and that Mr. Alia made the sword for him. Callisto was very surprised and said it couldn't be true, asking if the sword was really made by the High Elf himself. Edward smiles and says he can hardly believe it himself, now that even he can stand up to a mage, while his family watches him. The old man points to the sword and says that's not what he meant, since a High Elf couldn't have made or given the sword, but Edward insists that's exactly what happened, though Callisto disagrees. Callisto strictly orders Edward never to show the sword to anyone, and a frightened Edward agrees. Callisto invites Edward and Luke to come with him. The boy and his father agree, but the mother is surprised by their decision. Startled, she asks Edward if Luca will come with them, while Ars raises his hands and says that Grandpa is scary. Rampa tells Sonia that Luca will be with him. Edward assures everyone he'll only help with arrows and asks his wife not to worry, and Luca greets everyone. But his mother objects because he's only 10 years old. The main character stands before his mother, who is holding Archie, and tells her he wants to go with her, smiling as he says he wants to protect the village, his mother, and Archie. After he spoke, his younger sister and mother calmed down and smiled at him. Luca promises them he won't get into trouble, and his mother and Archie believe him, while Edward watches Callisto. People stand behind stakes forming a barricade. One holds a sword, another a bow, who then sets down a pile of arrows and says he brought more. Jonathan looks at the arrows and says nothing will happen to him, but it's clear something is bothering him. Luca asks what's wrong. Jonathan picks up a bundle of arrows and says there are plenty here, but still not enough for everyone. Luca looks at Jonathan, raises a finger, and says there's no need to worry because these arrows are meant only for them. The main character runs off, saying he's going to make arrows for everyone else, while Jonathan watches him go, surprised. Jonathan asks the running boy if he has enough mana, and Luca is surprised because the boy can gather mana from outside and doesn't have to use his own. Maybe everyone is worried because he's still just a kid. Roger stands before Edward and Callisto as his grandfather praises the scouts for doing a great job, and Edward asks Roger if there are any updates. Roger tells them that the magical creatures have stopped right at the edge of the forest, and another group of creatures has joined them, leaving Callisto and Edward surprised. Two magical creatures stand side by side, and Edward asks why they're together since these beings usually fight over territory. Edward turns to Callisto and asks what he thinks about it. The old man replies that maybe someone else is pulling the strings. On a hill among the trees, a dark figure watches someone and raises their hand. The watchman on the tower nervously warns everyone that the animals have started moving, while the people below look up at him. Edward turns to Callisto and immediately realizes he heard everything. Roger is standing behind me, and Callisto says we need to keep moving. Roger stands before a large crowd armed with bows, all ready to defend themselves against magical monsters. Edward warns everyone to keep shooting at the animals. The main thing is to hit them, and he and Callisto will finish them off. The magical monsters launched their attack, charging forward quickly, while Roger and the other shooters ready their weapons to fire. Edward orders the archers to shoot, pointing his sword at the monsters, and they unleash a volley of arrows, some of which hit their targets. Several arrows stick out of the monsters' bodies, but they keep moving forward. At the top, a dark silhouette can be seen. The creature on the cliff is still standing there, not even engaging in battle, which means it hasn't been noticed at all. It mocks them, calling them brainless commoners, while Callisto and Edward stand aside, not yet attacking the enemy. Suddenly, Edward notices something strange and looks back to where the creature had just been, but it's gone. Callisto asks what happened. In the clearing among the grass and trees, there's no one around. Edward thinks maybe he just imagined it, while Callisto looks at him and he replies that nothing happened. A black liquid starts flowing through the grass across the ground. It's the creature that stood on the rock and then disappeared. It keeps crawling through the grass, scaring a little mouse that runs away. Then suddenly the liquid spots a man on the hill and focuses on him. On the hill stands the main character, clenching his fists tightly and silently cheering on his dad and grandpa, while the creature doesn't understand who this strange boy before it is. The guy looks ahead, unaware of the creature, which laughs and says it doesn't matter as it keeps crawling toward the building. The liquid slips past people who don't even notice it, until suddenly the creature catches sight of something. By the door of Luke's house, his mom stands holding Archie, with another girl standing beside them. She looks at Sonia with worry, calls her aunt, and asks if everything will be all right. Sonia reassures her, saying they are strong and will definitely get through this, and Ars agrees. A black liquid suddenly stretches out, forming a mouth, and it says it recognizes Sonia. Stvora looks at Luke's mom and says she's the woman who ruined his life. The liquid says he won't forgive her, and all three of them notice the creature and immediately get scared. The creature takes on a human shape and says it will play with her until nothing is left of her. It calls Sonia by name and sticks out its tongue. The girl screams and clings to her aunt, while Archie hides his face, saying he's scared, and Sonia looks at the creature in fear, saying this can't be real. Luca turns to the side, surprise spreading across his face as he realizes he has a bad feeling about this. He's heading home because he knows he needs to be with his mom and sister. But he feels a sharp pain in his chest again, clutches it, and coughing, drops to his knees, catching the immediate attention of Callisto and Edward. Both look at the main character with fear. The father calls the boy by name, and Callisto asks what happened to him. The boy blushes with pain, unable to understand where it's coming from, but he tries to pull himself together because he needs to hurry to his mom and Archie. It seems something is holding Luke's soul back, as if something else is controlling his body. Edward leans over his son lying on the ground in pain and asks Callisto what's happening, while Callisto tries to figure it out. With a sinister smile, Callisto understands everything, and says it's impossible because the boy is under a binding magical contract, and Edward adds that Luke is seriously ill. A boy with closed eyes tries to focus on his mana to understand the cause of this strange feeling, and sense the spell someone cast. The main character tries to get rid of it using his magical power, with flashes of light flickering before his eyes. Someone tells the boy to get ready. Luca opens his eyes, recognizes the voice, but it no longer matters because he clearly feels the mansion all around him. Suddenly, the main character jumps up and runs off quickly, realizing he has to go, while his grandfather and father watch him leave, shouting after him. Edward is surprised and asks Callisto why his son is so fast. The grandfather tells Tom to follow him and says he'll handle things himself. The boy runs so fast that big rings form in the air behind him. Aiden, holding his sword on his shoulder, angrily points at Luke and asks what he's doing, but Luke runs past him, causing Aiden to fall and drop his sword. The main character is running down the path leading straight to his house, where he sees a strange creature, his mother, and two girls by the door, leaving him confused about what's happening. Luca wonders what he's doing with those he cares about, while at that moment, a creature ominously stares at Sonia. The main character kicks the creature right in the head, leaving Sonia and the girls stunned by the bold move. The creature's head starts to change, and the main character is surprised to realize it's a slug. All three are happy to see Luke because he saved them. The mother and the girl call him by name, while Archie joyfully shouts to him, calling him brother. The thug falls to the ground, clutching his head and asking how Lucas dared to hit him in the face, while Lucas stands over him, warning him not to even think about touching his mom or sister. The main character looks down and notices his shoes starting to dissolve after touching the creature, and one shoe slips off Luke's foot. The creature smiles and stands up, saying the boy looks strange, then tries to see his face but can't. The slime screams and lunges at the main character, who realizes in horror that he must not touch it. The creature reaches out and almost touches the bow, but suddenly its father appears and swiftly cuts off its hand with a single motion. The main character is glad his father saved him, and Sonia, Arch, and his niece are also happy that Edward arrived. The creature writhes in pain, realizing it's Edward again. She tells him she will never forgive him, calling him by name, while Edward glares at her with fury, recognizing her. Edward stands before his son and says the Viscount's son has been dead for a long time, but the creature replies that he is not dead, and only Edward, the Margrave's son, will perish. The boy looks at his father in surprise, who admits he doesn't know how, but it seems Edward became a monster after his death, and Luke reflects on the fact that Edward is the Margrave's son. Edward got angry and shouted at the creature that he didn't care if it was a monster or the Viscount's son. He wouldn't let anyone harm his family. The creature orders Edward to be silent, then attacks them, while Edward holds his sword up, and Luca tries to protect his father by casting a spell with both hands. Suddenly, the creature swallowed several clay dolls made by the main character, and, surprised, it asks what they are. He starts to get very angry and orders the dolls not to touch him, because he sees himself as an aristocrat. Seizing the moment, Edward lunges at the creature with his massive sword, ready to kill, telling it he stopped being a noble the moment he became a monster himself. Edward swings his sword several times, slicing the monster as splashes fly and dolls spill out from its body. The creature's head flies off its shoulders, loudly screaming Edward's name after he lands a powerful blow, while Sonia glares at him angrily. Edward says he came here because of his contract, and thanks to it he gained his precious family. The creature's head lies on the ground as Edward turns back to his son. Sonia calmly watches her husband, while Archie happily says that Dad and his brother are so cool. Then Sonia and the girls walk over to Edward and Luke. Luca smiles thoughtfully, reflecting on how close things came to going very wrong this time. He wonders why he was born into a family with memories from a past life and wishes he could remember everything. But he knows that if he does, he won't feel as close to his family anymore. Suddenly, the main character hears a voice in his head saying his soul will be replaced, and his eyes turn black. Luke points his hand at his mom and sisters, and shards suddenly fly through the air toward them, while Edward stares at his son in shock. Edward realizes these are stone shells. He looks at his son with fear and asks what he's doing. Sonia and Archie look at Luca in surprise. Archie's face turns sad as she turns to her brother, who stares at them with a completely blank expression. Suddenly, the main character is stopped and knocked to the ground by clay dolls he had made himself earlier. Edward watches in disbelief, stunned that even his own magic couldn't protect him. A young man lying on the ground starts breathing heavily, clenching his fist as he tries to grasp what he just did. The main character's eyes return to normal as tears fall, realizing he just tried to kill Ars. Everyone stares at him, and suddenly someone says that despair tastes delicious. The severed head of this creature says it feels power from the boy but can't recall any details. Edward stands before the head holding a sword. She says his memory seems damaged from the revival, and though he realizes he's alive, he's scared because the voice is female, struggling to make sense of what's happening. The leader says the aristocratic boy and the slime that swallowed him are already dead, and only she remains. Edward raises his sword to her head and asks who she is and what she did with the bow. The head repeats the name Luke, saying it suits him perfectly, then starts making strange, incomprehensible sounds. She looks at the boy holding the dolls and says she doesn't remember anything, but those dolls are definitely connected to Luke somehow. The main character feels a sharp pain in his head and clutches it with his hands, while the severed head takes on feminine features and says the boy's emotions taste delicious. Luca looks at her fearfully, trying to figure out who she is, as he recalls standing in front of this house in a past life, with cars parked nearby. The main character is holding several boxes tied with ribbons, gifts for mom, dad, and sister. One box is big, the other is smaller. 3 people were born on the same day, but only one of them celebrates their birthday on a different date. The main character smiles and says his father had long dreamed of a set like this, and will definitely be happy with the gift. Luca realizes these are memories from his past life. He happily returns home, tells his mom and dad about it, and wonders who came to visit. A dark-haired girl sits at the table across from his mom and dad. The main character realizes she's probably their neighbor, and she smiles at him, greeting him warmly and calling him Rue. He angrily asks her what she's doing in his house, and the girl replies that his reaction really hurts her, while the main character's mother adds that he's a high school student. The girl tells him that his parents have shared a lot about him, and his mother adds that he hasn't changed at all. The girl's smile fades as she points and signals to be quiet, causing her mother to tilt her head to the side. The main character is shocked and asks mom and dad what's wrong with them, then throws all the boxes on the floor. He looks at his parents and asks the girl what's wrong with them, as they sit still with their eyes completely white. The guy yells at her, asking what she did to them, and the girl replies that they're fine, they just fainted. A girl smiles slyly, rests her chin on her hand, and tells the guy he better ask what she did to his little sister. The guy storms up to her angrily, shouting and demanding to know where Kiri is and what she did to her, but the girl just keeps smiling. She points at the couch, hinting that someone is lying there, and the guy turns around to see his sister's feet sticking out from behind it. Sherry lies unconscious on the floor. The main character rushes over, sits beside her, and urges her to wake up. A girl approaches him from behind, reaches out her hand toward him, and he straightens up. She says she put him to sleep using magic. The main character realizes they can't move and asks what kind of magic this is and why it's needed. The girl licks her lips and says she needs it for food because she's a demon. Demons feed on human emotions like anger, love, and other feelings. The guy keeps talking about magic and demons but insists they don't live in fairy tales, and the girl agrees, adding that she's the only demon in this world. The girl leans towards the boy, wraps her arm around his shoulder and smiles, saying she feels like she's been born anew, while the boy looks scared. There are many elves, all of different heights. Demons have mind control abilities, and their only natural enemies are the tall elves. A demon asks the boy if he knows the spell demons created to fight these monsters and offers to tell him about it. She says the curse forces him to kill everyone he cares about, and she recalls a tall elf who admired humans and their strength, but whose soul was darkened by this curse. A girl introduces us to a dark demon with a terrifying smile, known as the Demon King because he has killed so many people. Demons began gathering around him to revel in his suffering, and she represents the face of those demons. But the Demon King killed them all, calling them pests, when suddenly a hand reached out to the demons, frightening them deeply. Giying, this demonic girl, gathered the strength of her fallen comrades to come back to life, while the boy wonders why his family was targeted. The demon licks his lips and tells the main character that nothing tastes better than despair. She looks at the boy's parents and says that's why she was searching for the kindest family in the area. The greater the love, the deeper the despair. Then she glanced at Chiri. A girl asks what could be worse than being killed by your own family. The boy, confused, asks what she means. Then she raises her hand and suddenly he realizes he can't control his body. It starts moving on its own. She wonders what despair tastes like for someone who has killed their entire family. As the man grabs his sister by the throat and starts choking her, he angrily realizes his hands are moving on their own and asks the girl to stop them. The demon explains it's a curse. The more deeply he falls in love, the stronger his urge to kill becomes. The main character trembles but keeps choking his sister, battling himself, while the demon calls his soul corrupted and demands he kill everyone he loves. The young man keeps fighting the curse, but his strength is fading. Through tears, he silently calls his sister his most precious treasure. A scream comes from the boy's house, and the girl, standing with her back to him, says he's amazing. She says that even those without strength manage to resist the curse, and she finds that deeply moving. The girl says he's trying to resist. The main character managed to get close and hit her, but she didn't even flinch. The boy holds his fist where he struck the demon, and she tells him he has the power of the sacred sword. The main character storms in angrily, while the demon says the girl doesn't even realize what's happening. Black liquid drips from her eyes as she remarks how amazing it is that people can do such things when they're desperate. The demoness throws her head back as cracks spread from the spot where she was struck, admitting that in this world her body is incredibly fragile. She was killed by a sacred sword no bigger than a needle. She grabs the boy's tear-streaked face and tells him she doesn't want to be with him at all, as a few drops of blood fall to the floor. A tiny onion bulb looks up as Sonia and Edward smile warmly, welcoming their little son. A young man lies down, trying to speak but only making sounds, struggling to understand what's happening to him. A mother holds Luke gently in her arms, rocking him softly as he realizes he has become a baby and understands this as his new beginning. He remembers the girl grabbing his face, saying she was dying and didn't want to say goodbye. But the main character realizes she's already gone. But he knows she killed him at the same time. The boy trembles with tears, lying in his mother's arms. Images of his parents and sister appear in his mind. He silently apologizes to them, but feels glad he was able to protect them, while Sonia, holding Luca in her arms, asks why he's crying, and Edward watches their son anxiously nearby. Sonia asks her husband to smile, and Edward starts making funny faces and sounds to entertain their son. The boy finally smiles and looks at his parents, realizing they love him deeply. But then a voice echoes in his mind about a broken soul, and his eyes turn black. Lucas starts slapping his mom's face with his hands, which makes her hit him back. The father, surprised, asks why he suddenly started fighting. And the boy, with a sly look, recalls the demon's words. A smile from the demon girl appears in his mind, as if whispering that when Chris wakes up, his memories will come back too. The main character realizes that his curse is the urge to kill everyone he loves. His mother looks at him worriedly and asks if he's hungry, and Edward smiles, snaps his fingers, and asks Lucas to take a look at something. The boy's eyes return to normal as he looks at his father, who created the water and says that water flying in the air is a fun kind of magic. Sonia breathes a sigh of relief, telling the man he's okay, while the boy wonders if magic really exists in this world. The main character realizes that the curse of the demonic girl is a form of magic, as demons possess spells that affect the human mind. He realizes he can use this to fight her curse. Edward stands with his sword at the demon's head, shouting at Luke to stay calm, while Luke clutches his head and his mother and two sisters rush to him. The demon girl's head smiles, sticks out her tongue, and asks the boy if he remembers how close they used to be. Everyone gathered around the main character, who is kneeling and holding his head, with the dolls gripping his back. Edward urges his son to stay strong, while the demonic girl laughs. The girl calls the guy by his past life's name and says his emotions taste delicious. The main character glares at her angrily, realizing he was cursed the moment they met. Little Luke lies in his crib with his eyes closed, wondering if he can break the curse on his own since he's already tried everything, clenching his fists and focusing on the magic inside him. Suddenly, the young man's eyes fly wide open, and he sees everything around him as if from a bird's-eye view. He feels one with the world, almost floating in the air, filled with a powerful energy as if all the spirit and strength of the world have merged within him. And he wonders, what if he just disappeared, so he wouldn't hurt those he loves anymore? In his mind, he sees his father fighting wolves in the forest, his hands scratched and his sword stained with blood. The main character realizes the man before him is his father, but can't make sense of what's happening. Edward's face shows wounds, including one over his eye, and he yells for them to stay away from his family. A dark shadow approaches Sonia, who is holding Arcea. Arcea is crying, and Sonia pleads for it not to come any closer. The main character realizes the child is his little sister. Their mother screams at Edward to save them. Both start crying, and he understands he's seeing his future. Everyone he loves is in danger, and he can't die until he helps them. A boy lies peacefully in his crib, thinking about the mana flowing inside him. The parents stand beside the child. Edward calls the boy's name loudly, and someone else stands behind them. Edward and Sonia are tense, but Luca senses it's his parents' energy and realizes they're passing their strength on to him. A father holds his child's hand, and the main character senses an unsettling energy from him through his connection to the world, realizing that the contract's magic restraining his opponent feels like a curse's power, seeping into his body and trying to overcome the curse. The parents hold their son's hands as he fights poison with poison. The curse grows stronger, feeding on his thoughts and soul, and he recalls the demon telling him a part of her would always remain with him, his last memory. Edward closes his eyes, realizing that nothing works because the father's contract can't break the curse. He recalls the demon's words, that the curse feeds on his mind and soul. The main character understands everything and decides to sacrifice his soul. Though it will disappear, he can give his memories to make the binding spell stronger. He remembers how the demon killed him and recalls her words that he will destroy everyone he loves. He can't break the curse but can alter it slightly through a magical contract. According to the contract, he won't feel any special emotions toward anyone except his family. The boy stands calm and indifferent, lost in thought, while Edward reassures Sonia, who is worried that their son doesn't smile at all. A young man trains on a dummy, using his magic only to protect his family, while Edward explains to his son the importance of knowing your limits in everything. The young man clutches his chest. If the curse takes hold, the contract will fight back, and he will die alone, far from everyone he loves. The main character stands with closed eyes as magic swirls around him, the curse and contract merging into something new. Luca thinks about how he will disappear, and a new boy, a new him, will protect his new mom, dad, and future sister. Edward happily holds his son in his arms, with Sonia smiling beside him and a cheerful priest standing behind them. This is how Luke was born. His parents are crying tears of joy, and Sonia kisses the little hero on the cheek. A young man stands before the demon's head, everyone watching him anxiously as he says he remembers everything. It's the demon's curse, and the head confirms it's true. A devilish girl smiles and says she doesn't remember herself but feels like a part of her is inside him, calling Luke sweet truth. The demo girl says she's overwhelmed by the main character's emotions. Edward grabs his sword, swings it angrily, shouting and asking if she's tormenting his son. Edward swings his sword and throws it straight at the demon's head, the blade hitting its mark and sticking firmly in the skull. The father turns to his son and calls his name. The boy still holds his head. The mother asks Luke if he's okay, while a doll lies nearby with the two girls sitting close by. The main character starts breathing heavily with his eyes closed. Then suddenly his soul twists again as he opens his dark eyes wide. Clay dolls freeze the boy in place again, and he asks his family to stay away, afraid he might hurt them. Sonia starts crying. Her father looks at his son in fear, unsure of what to do, and Luke's cousin begins to cry too. Arch, tears in her eyes, clenches her fists and says her brother is in pain, and she doesn't want that. The main character holds his head, silently apologizing to Archie for promising to protect her, but only upsetting her. Yet he vows once again that everything will be all right. Luca is contemplating suicide because he believes it will stop him from hurting his whole family. He remembers the moment he struck the demoness and the power he used to defeat a demon in another world. Now, he wants to forge a holy sword and infuse it with all his mana. It symbolizes a holy sword that shines brightly. By piercing himself with it, he will destroy both the boy and the very oath. The main character tries to hold back the pain, believing that even if he dies, his loved ones won't have to suffer. He looks at his worried family, silently thanking them for their love and feeling deeply loving toward them in return. His younger sister stands before him, tears in her eyes and a sad expression, begging her brother not to do it. The main character starts to say goodbye to her, but the girl shouts with all her might that they shouldn't part ways. In the main character's mind, his younger sister's voice echoes again, shouting that he shouldn't do it, while Luca feels frustrated because it's so noisy around him. Luke remembers asking Arka not to disturb him while he was sleeping. Arka looks at her older brother with a questioning gaze, realizing he won't be there anymore, and starts to cry. Someone reports that Luca is in trouble, and is on his way. The tall elf asks you to trust him but says he'll need a little help. The elf asks the main character to wait. The boy opens his eyes, looks surprised, and tries to figure out whose voice it is. Suddenly roots burst from the ground, wrapping around the boy and lifting him slightly. He cries out in surprise while his whole family watches, and his father asks in astonishment where the roots came from. Suddenly, a voice calls out to Luke, warning him that if he dies, everything will lose its meaning, and Luke and his family look surprised toward the direction the voice came from. A tall elf named Aaliyah approaches them, squints one eye, yawns, and says she suspected there was something about the boy, but never thought it was a demon's curse. The hero is lifted into the air by his roots and tells the elf that this is why he must end it all. Then Aaliyah approaches, reaches out and asks Luca to wait, not wanting to lose a close friend. He points at Luke with a smile and tells the main character that the curse can be lifted, leaving the boy looking at him in surprise. Mr. Aaliyah approaches Luke and says that luckily, they have everything needed to break the curse, while Luke's whole family watches the elf's actions. Aaliyah points to herself and says she is a high elf, and that the boy's family is here too, while everyone around looks at the elf with surprise. A tall, high elf approaches little Arch, takes her hands and says, "Among all the people, only one can make a pact with the world tree." Aaliyah smiles and tells Archie she can lift the curse from Luke, and the girl looks at her in surprise, asking again about her abilities. Edward asks the elf which contract with the world tree he means and what it actually involves, while Aaliyah adds that the child is always climbing the sacred tree, which is truly enormous. A little girl stands holding a stuffed bunny while a tall elf explains that she's unknowingly using the tree's power to protect herself. "And I also want to protect my dear brother." Luca stands holding an axe. The main character asks if Arka can feel his mana thanks to the power of the sacred tree. Aaliyah smiles and says that's true, explaining that usually it takes the power of the high elves, the true guardians of the world tree. Luke's parents look at him in surprise as he says, "Who would have thought a girl with such talents would come from such a remote village?" Aaliyah keeps holding Archie's hands and tells him that she is now the new guardian of the world tree, and the girl looks at her with surprise. A high elf recalls the world tree, explaining that in the enchanted forest there's a special tree that has long been without a guardian, and with its help, the girl can make a pact with the tree. Edward objects and tells Mr. Ali that Arcia is only 2 years old, while the tall elf asks them to be quiet because Arcia herself must make the decision. The girl hesitates, looking at her brother trapped by tree roots and sees the pain he's in. The girl starts crying loudly but eventually decides she wants to save her brother.